That specific name? Says the tutorial tester. He's surprised while a boy approaches. He was about to say something about the test, but the second the goblins spawned, a figure passed and beheaded both creatures in a single strike. Hyuga was confused. Who's that guy? See, today is the player qualification tutorial day, and until now, he's unimpressed with every single attendance. They all suffer too much to kill some mere goblins and can't barely hold on. A 2 versus 1. This guy is even scared of going to the next stage and decides to quit. The best until now reached the round 20, which is okay. So what the hell is this? Why, in a minute he's seeing a sea of dead monsters. The boy keeps advancing rounds faster than even he could follow. His cuts are too sharp and his movements too skilled. Something beyond a master swordsman. Test 49 came and the ground shook, the floor began to crack. But before we have to understand who is this boy. He used to run the strongest team and being the rank 1 guildmaster. So why is everyone dead on ground while he's barely being able to hold on and it's about to die? He's been friend with this blonde guy called Kyojo for the past 10 years and even gave him a rare legendary item to protect him on this dangerous raid. All so they could succeed in the floor 8. But when the boss appeared and Narukami and his teammates went to fight it, Kyojo and his goons smiled. The perfect chance to get rid of the top guild had arrived. While they were distracted fighting and this cute healer was giving her best, the fake friend suddenly appeared from behind and stabbed her. But why this guy is betraying Narukami if they are all trying to save the world? 10 minutes fast forward and Kyoji shouts that he hated how much they've helped him. He hated being in the shadow of Narukami and his top 1 Blue Eyes guild. But today, that changes. That's what Blonde thinks, but he's not ready for what's to come. A lid hits the floor and a boy pops out of a trash bin, asking himself if this is Earth. He's now Hosoi Subaru at level 1, who has memories of people saying that he's a loser that don't come closer to the real Subaru that died 20 years ago. He then sees online info about the Blue Eyes guild, and strangely still exists. And people are saying to carry his past will, then one saying to carry it is none other than Kyojo himself. The revenge target is obvious, but he's just a level 1, while this guy has all his past power plus 20 extra years of leveling and farming. He promises that he will make this bastard remember who's the real top 1. But how is he going to fight the guy that now owns the Hunter world? The envy of Blonde has its roots. In the final battle, when the boss used its first roar strike, Narukami was able to stop it with a single strike. While his companions drowned him in praises, Kyojo envy at the side only grew stronger. That day and moment he stabbed the healer and smiled on her death, Subaru was being attacked by the boss. It felt as if Kyojo was attacking out of angry, but if we roll back, we discover that that same guy used B in Narukami's team. But he left it saying that he had a new plan to become stronger. The plan was killing him. So now we're back and the question is how a level 1 is going to kill the strongest guy on Earth. Plan A was to find some info on the old players of Blue Eyes. So he went to his own memorial while everyone prayed with their Subaru's mask on. He saw a glowing flower above the casket. He rushed, grabbed it, and recognized that this was one of his old teammates' skill. In the day of the last battle, he used a cyclone skill to push the bodies of friends away. So maybe that had a chance to survive. But if they are alive after all this, are they still truly his allies? With no power, rushing things is the worst option. So before any contact, he need to get his strength back. Sword in hands, cause in 2 days the player qualification tutorial will begin. The good part of Kyojo being alive is that he can be killed, eventually. Now we're back at the test day. The moment he achieved the step 49, the place trembled, the floor crackled. Hyuga shouted for him to run. Was he thinking he was Narukami Subaru for some reason? The Goblin King spawned furious seeing the sea of green bodies. Baldi asked for him to forfeit, and the boss advanced. Hosoi dropped his sword, grabbed iron nails from a mace at the floor and hurled them directly at the boss' eyes. The creature staggered back, and the moment it struck down, Hosoi's sidestep. This precision came from training with this goth babe. If that was my trainer partner, I would also be that precise. One to the jugular and multiple to the body. The unbeatable king was already exhausted, and like nothing it fell face first to the ground. Hosoi casually grabbed his sword and finished him off. He was the first one to defeat the Goblin King, and clear step 50. However, Subaru was very worried about having such a monster in the tutorial. Anyway, the boy began to level up like crazy and also gained access to the tutorial shop. He had 2,500 credit points, but it was his first time seeing the shop. He had several things he could buy with the current money, and some things were really good. For example, the nameless demon sword that cost 1,000 points. Subaru felt like buying it, but its special ability drained his life. Another sword was the sacred sword Miranda, which cost 1,400 points. Since this one relieved fatigue, it was a better choice than just focusing on destructive power. However, Subaru knew that neither choice would be good if he didn't think more. Anyway, he was surprised because he was deciding between two, but saw that there were more things. He could also buy the appearance bet, which cost 1,400, but removed the bad effects of items and abilities. Seeing this, he didn't think twice about buying it, and along with the bet, he bought the demon sword, since he wouldn't lose life anymore. Subaru was quite satisfied with the choice he made. The bald man understood the logic of the purchase, but commented that he still didn't understand one thing. He asked why Subaru bought the bet, because it could be useless in the future. Then, Subaru questioned whether he really needed to share everything he thought, and, naturally, Hyuga felt a bit disrespected. In any case, The bald man accepted to let it go this time and acknowledged that he had nothing. In the end, Subaru only thought that he didn't expect the kid to become an instructor. A long time ago, Helger was a fan, and he went to ask for an autograph. Subaru bluntly said he didn't have time for that. Then, the boy begged, almost crying, and said his name was Holger. Apparently, time had not been kind to make him bald so early. Anyway, Subaru said he didn't want to answer anything and asked for the results to remain a secret. Without hearing anything, Holger said he would teach the boy to be a good citizen, and asked if Subaru would join the Knights Guild, but he replied no. Holger panicked and tried to say how lucky the boy was to have an instructor guiding him. However, the protagonist simply went upstairs, leaving the bald man alone and sad. Seconds later, on the second floor called the Starting City, it seemed like a fair was happening. Everyone was selling their goods, but Subaru was worried. He had gained an impossible chance, a second opportunity to change everything. Having lived this once, Subaru knew he had to do things better than before. This was for his comrades who must be waiting for him and to finish his revenge. In the Starting City, there was a private training room. There, it was possible to test skills or equipment, and it was free to visit at any time. The receptionist pointed to training room number 1, but the protagonist asked to go to the 5th. The old man tried not to let the novice waste money, but Subaru insisted. Thus, he shouted nervously that whatever happened was his responsibility and paid 50 credits. In this place, the higher the number, the greater the difficulty. So, it was natural to offer an easier place for beginners. However, the protagonist wasn't really a beginner. He was well prepared for the 5th floor. After entering, Subaru grabbed the new sword, and it recognized the boy as its owner. All stats were temporarily increased, and the problem of draining life and stamina appeared. However, the greed skill kicked in, temporarily restoring a portion. Apparently, its level 1 wasn't enough to nullify everything. Then, the nameless demon sword began to absorb more and give back other stats. And at one point, the protagonist reached his limit. Without thinking twice, he used 10,000 credits to level up the skill to level 2. Now that it was a rank E skill, it could better withstand the sword's downside, although it still consumed life force. Once again, the protagonist's stats increased. Then, he ran to do the first test, throwing himself into the traps of the room. After a few minutes, the receptionist was already asleep when Subaru passed by the front desk. Waking up suddenly, he wondered if he was dreaming, because it seemed like that young man from before had just passed right in front of him. The receptionist got up trying to remember who it was, since only 10 minutes had passed. To be sure, he went to room number 5 to knock on the door, and he entered when he heard nothing, then was more surprised than ever, because the room was so destroyed that it looked like there had been an earthquake. The next day, Subaru stretched and complained because he felt his body as hard as a rock. The good side was that it was a weak demon sword, because a normal one would have been even worse. The negative effects had already worn off, thanks to which Subaru managed to use a bit of the power. With his current status, he couldn't even hold a demon sword. The compatibility of the skill he bought with the sword was great, and Subaru was already thinking that the greed bet would help with electric skills too. The problem was how he would improve it, because after leveling up, he was already broke. Having money problems made Subaru lament how messed up he was. Anyway, a person on the street comments to his audience that he feels a lot of nostalgia being there. He is a streamer who, after just receiving 1,000 credits from a guy named Alexandre, pours coffee on his own head. Subaru immediately thinks that this guy is crazy, but he looks online and finds a news article stating that 1in3 players is a streamer. Currently, there is a system where you stream and earn points in real time. Suddenly, someone arrives talking about the boy being there too. He says it's funny to find Subaru there. The protagonist starts to feel his body strange, as if he didn't like the person. This guy asks if Subaru is just going to ignore him, and the hero realizes he is afraid of him. The protagonist explains, trembling, that he also managed to get here. Then the guy sits down saying he is screwed because a loser like him managed to pass the tutorial. He confessed that he was hoping Subaru would die to the goblins. Before waking up in the trash, the true owner of this body was being bullied. Isaac said he did this because he was trash. He said the boy's name annoyed him and that he couldn't even do what he asked. Subaru said the credits he earned weren't enough to do it. However, he got kicked in the stomach when he tried to talk. He also ripped open a food bag and told the boy to live there in the dump because if he left, he would learn a good lesson. These memories made the hero understand why he was inside a trash can. Anyway, Isaac starts bragging that he made it to level 20 and that he is Reinhardt's son. He also says he learned a rank B skill, which is the maximum you can get in the tutorial. So Subaru just compliments the boy and warns that he is leaving. But, in this case, the blonde asks the hero to take advantage of him, leaving to buy a coffee and some snacks for him. Since Subaru doesn't respond, he starts to get furious. He asks, almost exploding with rage, if the boy has gone crazy for not obeying right away. However, it wasn't like Subaru had any credits left. Anyway, Isaac tells him to sit down. But the hero really didn't want to waste time avenging the body's owner. He was going to leave without causing problems, but the blonde grabbed the protagonist by the arm. Isak angrily asks if Subaru wants to find out what he does when disrespected. But the protagonist responds in kind, telling him to let go if he wants to live. The blonde says, almost bursting with hatred, that Subaru can't be so full of himself. Subaru just thinks he can't create a scene in front of all these people. But suddenly, the blonde starts laughing uncontrollably. He asks if the protagonist is scared because he knows he is a weakling. He also says that he must have barely escaped dying in the tutorial. But even though he is feeling good, he warns that whenever he wants, he can make him disappear without anyone noticing. Then he leaves, telling his friend to take care, which irritates Subaru for still being called a friend by Isak. It is said that there are 2 ways for players to get stronger. The first is by completing challenges. Passing the tower challenges and receiving rewards while continuing to level up makes the player strong. He needs to pay credits, but at least he doesn't die, just loses money and progress. The second method is hunting monsters outside safe zones or clearing special dungeons. It's much faster than challenges, but it's also real, so if you die there, you die in real life. Now Subaru was in the Orc Dungeon, a pretty dangerous place for players, but he thought it was better to take risks than to advance slowly, because the dangerous also means it gives better rewards. In his player kit device, Subaru checks some news again. A certain Narugami Subaru had 80,000 people live to raid the 4th floor. From the comments, this was already the 8th time he was trying, but seeing someone with such a similar name and wearing his mask irritates Subaru. Out of nowhere, someone sends him 20,000 credits, so the boy thanks them. Apparently, it was possible to send missions to streamers too. 3 other viewers send more missions that are, for example, prove you can do it. Unlike the fraud, the protagonist starts trembling with envy, because, while he was there taking risks, the copy was making money easily. Subaru really gets irritated and continues watching the stream for a few seconds, but he quickly stands up to continue doing what he has to do. He pulls out the sword he carefully stored inside an orc and prepares himself as a whole gang of them starts to arrive. Among them was also the orc general, who was the strongest and the boss. Even without the poison spikes from last time, Subaru claims to have something better. The demon sword absorbs the protagonist's health and boosts his stats. Then he jumps over the smaller ones, saying he doesn't have time for them, and speeds like lightning towards the boss. In 1 second, the protagonist reaches his head, and in the next second, he cuts the monster very well. Thus, he completes the dungeon and, not being foolish, later grabs an ancient mask. Acting like the others would be a good way to make money. So he put on the mask, thinking he would just do what he already knew. After all, among all these streamers copying the hero, he was the real Subaru. At the entertainment company Shounen, Narukami-ku starts a stream and a girl watches it. However, at one point she screams in anger and scares her colleague, making him jump out of his chair. She is outraged that 5 people couldn't clear a dungeon. The friend asks what's wrong because the first ones were supposed to earn 1,000 credits. Then he explains that some guy named Subikichi messed everything up, and that he might be a fan of Subaru because, while the real one was missing, the others were using his name. For her, despite living off this, the streams were dead because everyone was imitating Subaru. She also thinks it's disrespectful for these incompetents to risk their lives without knowing the basics. The friend asks why the girl gave up on the tower to work there then. After thinking, she replied that it was boring. In fact, the friend also shouldn't be talking much because he also gave up. He knew she had started climbing to meet Narukami-ko, and then lost motivation. Anyway, the girl screams that an excellent kid has appeared. However, since he was also wearing the mask, both nearly fainted. The boy asks why his colleague was watching such a lousy stream from the 2nd floor. However, she admits that whenever she sees someone wearing that mask, she gets a little curious, and she also charges the guy 1,000 credits for losing a bet. At the entrance of the 2nd floor, the protagonist thinks the place is nothing special. However, knowing there was a viewer made him feel a bit pressured. The girl on the account Luv Money asked if it was his first attempt, so Subaru replied that it was. Luv Money said it would be better if he didn't stream and focus on the first time, but there was already a bat monster there. But even with it coming at him full force, Subaru grabbed its head and slammed it to the ground like a sack of flour. Then the protagonist asked if Love was still worried. The goal of the floor is to clear the dungeon and escape alive. Another person enters the stream, but the girl keeps insisting that the protagonist shouldn't be greedy. So he thanks her but warns that there won't be any problems, because he also prefers to get stronger without relying on others. Obviously, everyone thinks he's crazy, and at least his name helps attract an audience. In the first match, a land creature goes straight for the hero's leg. However, he draws his sword and defeats the monster, saying that for now, he will rush quite a bit. He defeats the mud merman and earns 2 achievement points. After that merman, several of those giant bats appear flying, but the protagonist cuts them all down with a few swings of his sword. None of the viewers managed to see what just happened. Defeating those bats also gave 2 points, and the merman 4 points. That's why the hero said that if you pay attention to the sound, You could notice how many were coming and from where they were coming. And as the viewers were very surprised, Subaru said he would talk more. It still wasn't enough. He wanted to earn as many achievement points as possible. People were debating whether he was right to be quiet or was about to take a big hit. And it seems that way because the protagonist arrives at a place that looks like the bat's nest. When they notice Subaru there, the chat becomes very worried. But one person leaves a mission of 100 credits to the protagonist if he kills them all. The people think the guy is trolling, but Subaru thanks for the 100 credits. Back at the streaming company, the boy shouts asking what his colleague is doing, focused on that. However, he apologizes, and even so, she doesn't pay attention, as she is glued to the hero's screen. The boy asks what she is so interested in. Then, she warns that something is different. He starts to say that he will pay the debt, but the girl says that's not it. In fact, she had only been paying attention to the protagonist until now. The boy really can't understand, but it made sense, because he was exploding all the monsters alone. So, that habit of paying attention to those wearing the mask paid off. In the past, Subaru was praised because, even when he was countered, his breathing and focus remained the same. To others, his techniques seemed light all the time, as if he already knew what the enemy was going to do. Then, the protagonist thought for a bit but replied that he had no idea he was doing anything, and it had to be explained that normal people couldn't imitate him. Shigure also found it strange at first, and then Subaru realized that the key was making eye contact to make decisions. The one-eyed bats always attack by lunging their heads forward. Therefore, the more they have, the more openings they show, and Subaru takes advantage of this, using one to cut them all at once. For the viewers, the explanations were like, if you move your foot, you can walk. In the end, Louvmani reminds the boy not to forget to collect the credits, but he fiddles a lot with the player kit and stays silent for a good while, until he finally admits that he doesn't know how to accept. The viewers can't believe he's so clueless, but Louv helps the protagonist. So, the boy doesn't waste time and heads straight for the next objective. At the Suiton Company, the girl screams with happiness. She says this is very bad, but her face showed she was loving it. As the boy complains, she asks if he has ever seen anything like this before. He comments that the second floor isn't exactly easy, but the girl disagrees that this makes the hero any less amazing. She becomes so dazzled that she starts to believe it's destiny. And she also accidentally guesses that the boy is the reincarnation of Narukami Subaru, like in Manhwas. When the subject is Subaru, the girl gets dizzy just talking about him. But the friend named Saigen cuts her off before she starts thinking about going after the protagonist. That was exactly what she wanted to do, but Saigen was thinking like an investor. He said that if they talked about this to the boss, they would get scolded, so the two argued. But Louv gave up just for now, because she continued watching the hero's live stream. Finally, the protagonist is in the most important area of the dungeon. There was already the final place to complete it. Then, he leaned against the gates, and they opened by themselves, revealing a monster that was sleeping inside. That monster was the warrior wolf named Greg, the boss of the floor. The mission's objective was to earn the respect of the warrior wolf through a test. The system never said this was a monster to be hunted. It was a guardian. But someone offered 3,000 credits if he could defeat the wolf. In the protagonist's reality, that amount was quite large, so he became worried. In the end, the monster started to move little by little until it got up from the ground and began to talk to our hero. The first thing the wolf asks is if the protagonist is really alone there. Then, the hero asks him to check if he wants. Greg admits that he finds him interesting and that he smells like a very good warrior. The wolves of the warrior tribe can differentiate scents, and scents that reveal what a person is. Basically, in a second, the wolf gives permission for Subaru to continue advancing. But the hero apologizes and informs him that his objective is Greg, which leaves the wolf quite confused. Subaru explains that he has a mission to kill him, and having sensed the smell, Greg is able to understand. Back at Shounen, the two workers go to talk to the boss. Then the man named John Tail types on the computer and asks about the size of the protagonist's audience. Seijin shyly says it's about 20 people, but Love interrupts and proudly comments that it has already surpassed 30. The boss asks if the two are joking with him. The girl's real name is Hatsuka, and she gets scolded for not bringing someone with potential. The boss believes it would be better for her to become a streamer because she is quite skilled, but the girl simply ignores it and informs that Subaru already has 40 people live. Back in the dungeon, the wolf prepares to defend itself, and the protagonist tries not to think and just act. He pulls out his demon sword and focuses to stay calm, even though it's his first time. The monster leaps to attack the hero with great speed, and he defends himself at the last second. Greg pulls out his sharp claws and tries to slash the boy. He starts to be pushed back, then realizes that the enemy is quite strong. As he was already thinking, defeating him with brute force was impossible, but he had another idea for this and began to focus on dodging for now. Greg praises the protagonist, even though he says he has no chance against him. But the hero strikes the monster's claws at the right moment to make a perfect defense. Unfortunately, he ends up with his back against a wall, so the monster says he had a bit of fun in this fight and tells the boy to say goodbye. When Greg attacked, Subaru focused everything on fleeing beneath the warrior wolf. As he noticed the wolf's attack pattern, he made the monster hit the wall and get stuck so he could attack. Subaru wasted no time and made several cuts on the wolf, until he delivered the final blow that ended the fight. In the end, Greg doesn't mind and praises Subaru's talent once again, then falls defeated to the ground. All of the protagonist's skills level up and he earns 500 achievement points. The chat goes wild, and he also receives the reward of 3,000 credits from the mission. Now, with 3,150 credits and 618 achievement points, the door to the next level opens. But when he enters, a bunch of element option messages appear in front of him. There were about 16, and the number was according to the player's talent. If the protagonist didn't choose the Thunder path there, he would have to change his name. So he chose and was teleported to the next level. Back in Suiten, now the game turns and everyone gets as excited as the girl. Hatsuka says there are already 60 people live and that this is not normal. Then the boss agrees that it's impressive because he also defeated the wolf. Still, Subaru was a novice and it was risky to invest in him. But in this case, Hatsuka asked to make a bet with John. She said that if Subaru failed to conquer the thunder, she and her friend would go 5 years without receiving. Sejin shouts immediately that he doesn't agree with this, but John thinks he has nothing to lose. Only Subaru had managed to get the thunder so far, but Hatsuka was confident, so John agrees to hire the hero if he can, while the girl covers her friend's mouth. After choosing his element, the protagonist goes to the start of the thunder path, but when he arrives, someone pushes him away, shouting to be careful. That person barely saves the boy and herself because there was a dangerous giant there with a club. The young man shouts what the protagonist is doing and if he wants to die. Then a system message appears telling him to defeat the giant fragment. No one can understand why such a monster is appearing in this place. This was a giant that should only appear in the second half of the challenge, so the hero thought that killing Greg had changed something. The giant slams the ground with its weapon, but the protagonist manages to dodge somehow. That young man from before keeps saying they barely got away, but the protagonist focuses on finishing this quickly before they try to interfere. The giant leaves an opening when it raises its weapon, so the hero dodges, and when the monster strikes the ground, he uses its arm to jump very high, until he reaches the monster's head and goes for its neck. Then, in the neck area, he plunges the sword and ends the fight without even breaking a sweat, telling the giant to be quiet. But he didn't even need to say that because after being defeated, it would stay silent forever. When the giant is defeated, the system announces that the 4th stage has been cleared. The protagonist's level increases along with other stats, and he gains an item called Giant's Heart. That boy who tried to help the hero is confused, just like the people in the broadcast. The young man started to speak more politely after seeing that scene. He also asked who Subaru was, so he said he was the one who came to defeat the giant. Sometime later, in the city, the protagonist spends some time looking at what they are saying in the player kit. Everyone wants to see the item he won, which is probably rare. Then, as he is also curious, he tells everyone they will look together. He takes out of a subspace the giant's heart, which is a rare ring that increases vitality and regeneration. He also gets an armor called Thunderclap, which has thunder power. A viewer named Lovenarukama Subaru donates 5,000 credits for Subaru to get the thunder. So he thanks, and several other people also put a lot of credits into this mission, which makes the protagonist even more motivated to succeed. As so many people were so eager, Subaru began to recognize only now that he could have been special in the past. Finally, suddenly, someone knocked on his room door. That boy from before entered along with a blonde knight in armor. He apologizes for the delay and informs that he brought the captain of the night village, Sir Peleus. The two greet each other and start talking about the giant attacks. The young man explains that the knights stay alert 24 hours a day, and that the citizens do too. That's why he received Subaru so poorly. This time was tough. Because the protagonist protected lives while he was away, Peleus thanks him. But the hero says he only did what he had to do. Peleus is the face of the village. He is a brave knight who faces the giant race. Changing the subject, the knight comments that they have already found the giant chief and that they want to risk their lives to end this once and for all. Then the two bow to the protagonist, asking him to help save the village. Everyone in the chat comments that they don't want Peleus to die. But Subaru remembers that, according to the story, in the next stage, the night doesn't end well. Anyway, he asks the boy to lift his head, and saying he understands, he says he will help with everything he can. Thus, the knight thanks him, and the 5th stage begins. By late afternoon, a bunch of warriors go with the protagonist to the giant chief's location. Then he looks at the player kit. It was full of comments, and the views were increasing. But finally, the knight ordered the group to stop advancing because they could already see the body of a giant lying ahead. And that was the body of the chief of the giants they were after. Peleus agrees to go ahead to draw attention while the hero stays behind. However, the protagonist stops him before he can go do something foolish. Suddenly, the ground starts shaking, making everyone there hold on to avoid falling. Then the hero warns that that thing is already awake. When the monster looks at the group, a bunch of giants emerge from the ground and start chasing them. It's hard to understand why there suddenly is an army there. Peleus feels there's no way to fight back. Then the worst scenario begins as warriors are captured and devoured by those abominations. All of this in front of the others who will be next, with a psychopathic smile on their faces. Peleus shouts immediately for everyone to retreat to the base of the mountain. When the disaster starts, some knights are in shock, and others try to keep their composure. One of them loses his senses because he sees his brother being killed. Then Peleus shouts for everyone to run, saying it's an order. He tells the guys to think of their families and the village because if they die there, it will be the end. In the end, only Peleus and Falcon remain on the front line, but the protagonist also stands firm without moving a foot back. The blonde shouts that he needs to run too and leave the knights another day, but the protagonist says that he is the one who should be saying that. He asks why the blonde isn't running and explains that he won't be able to fight at full strength while the knight is there. Peleus tries to say that he can't run and leave a foreigner to handle it alone, but the protagonist insists, so the blonde goes out to try to gather some reinforcements. And since he owes his life to him, he hopes Subaru comes back safely. The giants all stand up, focusing on the protagonist, but he doesn't let himself be attacked first and starts running. He shouts that he will be the opponent of the monsters and quickly cuts the leg of one of them. Then he cuts another giant that was also nearby to reach him. The monsters begin to look more at Subaru because in the blink of an eye, he had already defeated two. Even if that was just a test, the hero didn't want to be the one left behind. While the fight happens, the blonde runs nonstop, but at one point, he feels angry with himself for having accepted to flee. The protagonist's chat doesn't believe he will actually fight. In theory, Peleus was going to die there, but Subaru knew he could already save everyone. So he continued on the battlefield and defeated two more monsters with one attack. Swinging his sword nonstop, he sends another one to the sky, and the demon's sword continues to absorb energy. Subaru starts to get tired, so he runs to clear a path and find the chief soon. Using the bodies of the giants to propel himself forward, he jumps over several smaller monsters and lands on another, but he doesn't stop. Subaru keeps jumping from giant head to giant head, and his equipment helps his stamina. He really needed to find the chief, and by the luck of fate, he managed to spot him in the midst of it all. The chief also seems happy to kill the protagonist. Subaru becomes more worried because if he doesn't finish the fight now, he will die. So, while the monster prepares an attack, he hopes it works. Subaru snaps his fingers to activate the thunderclap ability of the armor. The thunder hurts the giants, but what drives them crazy is the sound, so they all start thrashing around. Since even the boss can't escape this, the protagonist jumps over him, and not missing the chance, drives the sword into the giant's neck. It was such a quick move that the monster couldn't react, so it just fell backward, and the system notified that Subaru won. All the protagonist's stats increased significantly, and the chat is left in awe. For Subaru, if this were a normal manga, the protagonist would strike a cool pose, but the weather was turning bad, and the greed bet could no longer restore stamina. Even after clearing this stage, the monsters do not disappear until the end of the exam. Continuing now was a situation the protagonist was not prepared for, as he had almost fallen there. However, since stage 5 was completed, the sky closed, and a giant black thunder fell on Subaru from the clouds. At the same time, everything is happening. In a cabin in the middle of the forest, Rina spends some time sitting watching the player Kit. Shigure arrives and asks what she is doing. Then she says she is enjoying the breeze. Shigure agrees that Rina should enjoy it because soon the end will come for them. When she tries to talk seriously, her friend ignores her. Then the girl becomes curious to see what the other is watching that is so interesting. Rina shows that she is watching the live stream of a guy named Narukami Subaru. But just by Shigure suggesting he might be the leader, Rina gets irritated. She says he is just an annoying streamer who is on the second floor. And she remembers what her friend said. If Subaru had survived, Kazuki would be screwed by now. Rina knows the leader is dead, and wants her friend to accept it too, but she disagrees. Rina shouts asking how long she thinks the hero will hide. But Shigure responds by asking the same thing, if they are just going to keep watching too. Rina says she is just killing time watching that live, but is surprised when she looks again. Then Shigure also looks and makes the same shocked face. In the test, the protagonist manages to use the thunder element on the giants and also uses electricity on his demon sword. Then he becomes much stronger and cuts not just one, but all the giants that come near. When he finishes, Subaru realizes he won't have the strength to walk back. He defeated the monsters, but he was wrong to push himself too hard. Fortunately for the boy, he wasn't alone. Peleus really went to get reinforcements, and when he found the hero there, he ran to help him. But the protagonist couldn't even talk and was closing his eyes until he fainted. In the entertainment company, there is a tense atmosphere because they stopped watching the broadcast. Seijin and John try to think of a way to comfort the girl, and she seems to be crying, but in reality, her face was just red from embarrassment. She had sent a message to the hero and didn't want him to think it was just business. However, Sagan remembered it was indeed a work contact, Hatsuka shouts that she is much more a fan than a manager, so it's normal. And changing the subject, she says she already told that to the director. The thunder power that only Subaru had was now his and this new player's. John has no doubt that the boy did something worth paying attention to. Suddenly, Sagan announces that the hero read the email, and Hatsuka almost faints from excitement. But, unfortunately for the poor girl, he only viewed it, so the girl's enthusiasm went down the drain. On the same day, a streamer specialized in analyzing player combat prepares to work. Hokwai has gained a significant position with his opinions and tutorials on how to defeat enemies. He watches various videos of players with great attention, including Kurokawa Amon, who recently entered the blue zone, and also Kazuki, who is now the face of the players, will have his skills analyzed. Hokwai acknowledges that Subaru is a legend, and there is no one better to think of. So he thanks all the viewers for being present and announces that today's topic is about Subaru. Hokwai goes to see what is happening in the live topics and ends up on the protagonist's stream. Even he becomes worried about the hero's ability, who is using his new powers very well. Hokwai explains that the hero is controlling the flow and putting the necessary force into the sword without wasting energy. The streamer can't see anything to criticize and realizes that people don't understand this. He then comments that he will become someone important and that they should be paying attention. In the end, Hokwai almost forgets to use the unique ability, but with hawk eyes, he says that the boy's control must now be better than Subaru's at his peak. The next day, the protagonist wakes up startled. The system warns that stage 6 is still paused and asks if he wants to interrupt the challenge. Even though his fatigue is normal, the hero still feels quite tired. In any case, in the player kit, Subaru notices that his audience has increased while he was sleeping, so he apologizes because he will take some time to rest and ends the broadcast. The protagonist teleports to the waiting room of the challenge and sees a gate ahead. Then another message from Hatsuka arrives, asking him to pay more attention to the proposal. Subaru thinks right away that it's spam, but his face changes when he sees that it was sent by the entertainment company Shounen. Later, back in the city, Subaru looks at the player kit. He learns about the company that invests in players, which is quite large since it works with entertainment. The affiliated streamer from Shounen, Hokwai, praised our hero so much that it was going viral. Subaru notices that the comment section is a war zone, but he is also happy about the compliment and thanks Hokwai for his good taste. Outside where the protagonist is, Isaac starts to approach. When he hears the news from Hawkeyes about the hero having potential, he gets very angry because the boy is only on the second floor. Isaac has to control himself a lot to avoid losing it, but when he enters a tavern, he becomes much happier because he finds the protagonist inside. Isaac tries to talk, but Subaru ignores him, so he goes to the table and throws the hero's hot coffee cup on him. After getting attention, the boy apologizes and pretends he is just now seeing the guy. Isaac comments that the second floor is quite a small place, but the hero still doesn't pay attention. Therefore, the blonde asks again for the coffee and the sweets he requested the first time, but he gets furious because Subaru is about to leave. He shouts that he warned last time what would happen if he kept doing this. Then he grabs the protagonist and tells the hero to apologize if he doesn't want to die. But the hero pushes Isaac's hand away and says he doesn't have time for this nonsense anymore. He squeezed so hard that the blonde's hand almost broke. Thus, Subaru leaves, saying it's his payback for the coffee the other spilled. Isaac tries to stop him, but Subaru doesn't look back and slams the door in ignorance. The blonde confessed that he wanted to climb the tower peacefully, but after being treated like trash like that, he changed his mind because he thought he was being too soft. Outside the cabin, the protagonist looks at the kit and sends a message to someone who will receive it at that wooden house in the forest, because he had sent the message to Rina asking to meet. In a dark cave on the second floor, several monsters have been defeated by the protagonist. He prepares to enter the boss room, which is where the Lizard King is hiding. The protagonist's greed bet is already at level 3, so he is getting used to it. Suddenly, a spark of fire turns into a giant lizard called Salamander, which is the boss, and he runs like crazy. To avoid an accident like last time, Subaru wanted to test the lightning to see how far he could go. First, he puts the thunder power in his feet and jumps high to cut Salamander. Subaru acts like his old body, but the monster unleashes a fire blast to kill the boy before he ascends. Then he puts the thunder power into the demonic sword and cuts the fire, but fatigue rises. Finally, on top of the monster, the protagonist uses all his strength and splits it in two, finishing the dungeon with a foot on its back. At the dungeon exit, the hero sees that his fatigue is decreasing more slowly and that he still has plenty to spend. The problem was that to increase the greed bet, it was now 40,000 credits. Subaru just wanted someone to show up with a good job for him. But at that moment, a person appeared in the back of the forest calling his name. This person was already laughing at him for trying to level up there and said that, despite having known each other since childhood, he is still very surprised. Subaru says he is persistent, so Isaac quickly states that his patience has limits. And very close to the hero, he comments that he thinks it's better for this to be the last meeting between the two, which makes Subaru curious. Back in the main part of the starting city, the boy with hawk eyes enters a regular wine cellar. Inside, the president of the Shounen company, John, calls for him to come sit down. The two talk about normal things, like how work is going well, then Hokuai says it's more or less. However, John says that it's normal and that his audience won't just leave for no reason. Anyway, the two quickly get to the main topic, which isn't just having a cup of tea. The president wants to know about the evaluation Hokuai made of the protagonist. So, as he has already said, he repeats that his talent is greater than Subaru's. John doesn't question his friend's intuition and reveals that he intends to hire him as well. For this reason, the hawk-eyed one says that the president has a good eye for business. After hearing his colleague's evaluation, John is sure he should hire Subaru. Then he asks the streamer to collaborate with the protagonist to increase views. Back to the protagonist's fight. Now only the two of them were there, and the hero agreed without fear. Isaac starts saying that bad things happen when you enter a dungeon alone. He also mentions that the boy got this far by luck, mocking him for wanting to be Subaru. In fact, the blonde wanted the name of the blue-eyed leader to disappear because everything about him irritated the boy. Subaru feels a bit exhausted, living in a time when everyone has some feelings for him. So he asks why the villain is so obsessed with bothering him. Isaac immediately says it's because of the name, but Subaru replies that everyone seems to like his name. To explain, the blonde reminds him that the protagonist knows who his father is, but the hero still doesn't understand. Then Isaac says again that he is Reinhardt's son, which makes Subaru remember the saint of the one-hit sword. In the past, the protagonist won a fight and caused a huge uproar. Subaru, from the Blue-Eyed Guild, had suddenly appeared and defeated the ranker Reinhardt from Runeterra. All of this with just one attack and in less than a second. Then Reinhardt wanted to keep fighting, but after trying to get up, he fell flat on his face. In the present, Isaac again shouts for the protagonist not to say his father's name. Subaru still tries to understand if the hatred is because of his name or because of his father, and he also tries to explain that Hosoi Subaru suffered a lot for having that name. However, the blonde gets tired of listening to this nonsensical conversation and creates a ring of fire around the two. Then, with his hands full of flame magic, wanting to end this quickly, he tells Subaru to shut up and just die already. Isaac says he hates Subaru and also hates how everyone treats him like a god, although, from what he knows, it's because of him that his guild was exterminated on the 8th floor. Isaac says that's what they deserve and hopes they are burning in some hell right now. The blonde throws a fireball saying that the hero's luck ran out when he was born with that name, and it explodes on top of him. Isaac huffs in exhaustion, complaining that he didn't control his strength very well, but he's happy just thinking about going after the masked streamer next time. Then, when he hears the word masked, the protagonist emerges from the explosion wearing the mask and asking if they are talking about him. Isaac screams that it's impossible for the boy to be fine after taking that fireball to the face, but the protagonist says he doesn't like it when people shout, and even less to hear an idiot like the blonde. Then he punches the boy right in the stomach, making him fall to the ground on his knees. After the hit, Isaac can't even speak properly, so the hero mocks his face. Isaac can't believe this is happening, so Subaru invites the boy to play a game. He asks his colleague to guess if he is Hosoi Subaru or the masked streamer Narukami Subaru, or maybe even the real Narukami Subaru from the Blue-Eyed Guild. Isaac starts to understand that the protagonist is the famous boy from the streams, but for a loser like him to get the thunder element, he doesn't think it's a big deal. He says that a nobody like the hero won't be able to win at this level, and because of that, he says it means he is superior to the real Subaru of the blue eyes. Isaac lunges at the protagonist, exploding with rage, but now Subaru reacts brutally, cutting the boy's arm. While the blonde tries to understand, the protagonist asks how he is so confident. Isaac is still very confused, but then he starts to remember when Subaru talked about Hosoi's suffering as if he were another person, and he ends up discovering that the protagonist is the real Subaru, but it didn't help to find out before being completely cut off. With 2 strikes, the fight was over and the blonde passed out. Then the hero said that this would be his thank you for borrowing Hosoi's body. In a regular restaurant, people comment on having a Subaru fan there. They feel secondhand embarrassment and see that he is doing a live stream. After thinking a lot, the hero understood that wearing this mask all the time was good so enemies wouldn't know his identity. And finally, the person he was waiting for appeared. Hatsuka says it's a pleasure to meet him and mentions that she was the one who sent the message. Then she introduces herself but can't help but show that she is embarrassed. The two shake hands with great respect, and the girl sees that the boy looks a lot like the real Subaru, as if he had come back to life and was hiding his face with the mask. Subaru asks if something is wrong, and the girl almost explodes with embarrassment, especially since she remembers that the boss said she had to make a good impression and was already messing up. She starts scratching her head out of stress. Then the protagonist strikes up a conversation asking if she is a fan of Subaru. As Hatsuka says yes, the hero tries to downplay himself, but she also mentions that she is a fan of him. Hatsuka proudly says that, in fact, she had been watching his live since there was no one else, and that she was also very worried when he entered the giant's trial. In any case, the protagonist thanks her for her support. Hatsuka starts to say that it was destiny, and that's why she sent a message through the company's profile. Anyway, the girl controls herself to be more professional and talks more about the contract. From commercials to events, she says the company will do everything possible for the hero's brand, and what he has to do in return is just keep streaming. Subaru asks if every streamer has such a good life, but the girl explains that he is special. Anyway, he interrupts Hatsuka, talking about the conditions to ask if all the managers are also like her. Then the girl tries to say that they are better because she doesn't know if he is liking it or hating it. While the girl thought she was in trouble, Subaru was just seeing that her level was high. That's why he stayed quiet, because if a company manager was so strong, he had to become much more powerful. Hatsuka becomes increasingly sad, but suddenly the protagonist says he thinks he can trust her, and he extends his hand to formalize a contract with the Shounen Entertainment Company. Then the girl thanks him for his trust, almost crying with emotion. The next day, the protagonist opens a live stream and 703 people join to watch. He goes crazy that the views increase so much overnight, but Hatsuka was working for that, so he calls the audience to have fun with the show he is going to give. The protagonist starts the 6th stage called Legend of the Thunder Path. On a rainy day, inside a tent, the group of knights is preparing a plan to advance further. Peleus asks if the protagonist is already there. Then Falcon says no. Another one asks if they can trust him, and a colleague says it's hard to believe that a foreigner defeated the giant chief alone. 2 more say that the blonde can't be that naive if he didn't see him fighting. But Peleus shouts for the 2 to stop talking nonsense, and just when they were talking about Subaru, the boy appears. Peleus immediately goes to check if he is okay, then the hero says he is fine. In the eyes of the others, the protagonist's mask is quite suspicious. The hero realizes that the others don't believe he defeated the giant. He remembers that Hatsuka agreed to make a position to mute his microphone, so he only tells the NPCs that they are being very arrogant. Before anything else, an older knight thanks him, saying his name is Dale. Subaru says it's a pleasure, and the old man says he was defending the village when they were attacked by him. The hero immediately asks if there is anyone more powerful than the chief. The old man says that the true giants who once fought against the gods were sealed somewhere and disappeared. So, those that exist now are remnants of what were the best. However, Dale almost goes crazy talking about the giant that appeared after the hero killed the chief. A very heavy atmosphere fills the room, but the protagonist thinks it's simple to fight against him. Dale doesn't have the courage to ask for help and says that the hero is confident because he hasn't seen him yet. Peleus even shouts at Subaru, saying there is a legend that at the top of the Millennium Mountain, there's a hidden thunder fragment. And the legend also says that the one who must find the fragment is the benefactor of the village. A few days later, another village catches fire, and people run from several giants in despair. The leader of the giants there speaks as if he has seen his son and picks up a knight from the ground. Then, with him in the palm of his hand, he simply crushes him into a pulp and says he will avenge his son with human blood. Subaru is already very close to the chaos and sees the monster in the city after descending the mountain. The chat gets a bit scared because the giant looks like a crazy psychopath. Going back in time, the blonde said it would take 3 days for the giants to arrive and told Subaru to flee if he couldn't find the fragment. So, the hero went to the Millennium Mountain to try to find the power of thunder. But he wasn't afraid because he trusted he could overcome any challenge. The problem was that this catchphrase was the same one he used before, so the chat noticed the reference. Some supporters of the protagonist set missions worth credit for him. Anyway, the young man continues riding his horse until he reaches where the blonde said one of the thunder fragments should be hidden. Our hero stops when a huge stone wall blocks the way, then he starts to search. Peleus said that the fragment was passed down through legends, but he didn't even know what it was. Unfortunately, the blonde also didn't know how to obtain the power, but he was sure that whoever controlled the thunder would be able to defeat the giants. In the human world, Hatsuka shouts to the boss in happiness that she closed a contract. Then, he laughs a lot and says that the girl has finally become a decent person. Hatsuka thanks him but also asks if she wasn't good until now. Anyway, John informs that he met with the hawk-eyed man and hangs up, saying the young man will get in touch. As soon as the work ends, the girl lies on her bed happily to watch the hero's live stream. Watching him on screen and working personally was her dream come true. The girl caught the broadcast just as the protagonist said that catchphrase, but she was surprised instead of anything else, because she found it strange for him to say that so naturally. At the top of the mountain, the protagonist activates the thunder power and everyone thinks he is nervous. The hero made a hole in the stone wall, but he didn't stop. He continues and punches harder, creating an explosion of lightning. Then, he feels happy because he can finally find something important. Everyone in the chat asks what is happening with the hero. Only he was feeling that a thunder power was calling the thunder within his body, and this power is behind the door he just discovered on the mountain. As he moves forward, The chat discusses that the protagonist doesn't have a key to open it. However, he extends his hand, and as soon as he touches the stone, some lightning appears. Then, once again, the protagonist gathers electric power in his hand and clenches his fists to attack. He already knew the secret to open the door, so instead of looking for a key, he simply tried to break it down. When the protagonist's electric power touches the door, it reacts, trembling all over, and like a magic trick, it opens by itself for our hero to enter. Then, he takes a deep breath and walks to face the final challenge, and when he passes through the gates, they lock the boy in until he finishes. In that tent where the protagonist was, everyone continues discussing some strategies. The old man asks if the blonde really thinks the hero will obtain the power of thunder. Then, he says yes without even thinking. Dale says that the leader puts a lot of trust in him, but for Peleus, there was no reason to doubt. Suddenly, a person appears, shouting that everyone will die even if Subaru succeeds. He trembles in fear on his knees and says that the colleagues there don't know the power of the giant they will face. Peleus goes to the boy asking if they should give up then. The blonde really wants to believe in the protagonist because they were saved by him once. However, the boy says it's easy for Peleus to say that when he hasn't seen the monster. Out of nowhere, the tent starts to shake, and things from the tables begin to fall. Then, a knight enters the place, shouting that the enemy is here, which takes everyone by surprise because they didn't expect him to arrive so quickly. Inside the cave that the protagonist opened, he walks trying to find what the test wants him to do. Some say it doesn't seem to have anything, and a few mention interesting things, like how thunder can be so fast that it can't be seen. Subaru then starts trying to find something he isn't seeing. He closes his eyes, remembering that the name of the challenge is Thunder Path. The strongest power he was feeling was coming from beneath his feet, so he had an idea. He picks up a stone from the ground and throws it far away with all his strength. As electricity disperses in the air, it becomes invisible to the human eye. But the further it goes, the stronger it gets. Then, the protagonist's stone is destroyed a few steps ahead. Even knowing it's a test, the only choice he has is to keep moving forward. Then, the hero thinks it must be some kind of cruel endurance challenge, where if he can't pass, he will die. Several people give missions to the protagonist, and some tell him to stop to avoid dying. But he thanks them and continues on. In the forest cabin, while preparing dinner, Shigure looks at the player Kit with great attention. So much so that when Rina appears, she jumps from her chair in fright. Rina is startled too, then asks if her friend was watching something suspicious. Obviously, Shigure says no, and that she's just a bit tired. Rina, in turn, teases her by saying that hair usually grows more on perverts. In fact, since she was banned from watching streams, the girl had been bored. But Rina became curious because it seemed like she was being kicked off the couch. Shigure gets so anxious that she yells a lot at her friend. She tells the girl to rest somewhere else and to stop meddling in everything she does while turning off the kit's sound. Anyway, Rina feels uncomfortable there and gets up from the couch to leave. Since she crossed the line, the friend says the other can stay a bit longer and eat, but Rina slams the door in Shigure's face in anger. In any case, now Shigure can go back to watching the stream she was on, because if Rina had seen that she was watching this, it would have caused trouble. The girl thinks that even if they were different, Subaru wouldn't forget them, and it catches her attention how the protagonist behaves just like the leader, except for the part where he seems desperate for credits. In the end, the girl got distracted, so Rina's hand touched Shigure's shoulder asking if she thought she wouldn't notice. And just by the girl's expression, it was clear that she was furious. In the Thunderpath cave, the protagonist continues to proceed very carefully, but there comes a time when he starts getting electrocuted, and his progress is only at 2.3%. Subaru can only endure because he feels a familiar sensation, as he had to deal with this several times in the past. With 3.2% progress, it becomes clear that he still has a long journey ahead. But he pushes on, because now that he knows the objective, he just needs to be resilient enough. The people in the chat don't understand why he isn't running, because they aren't feeling his pain. Obviously, reaching the goal is the main thing, but if possible, the hero still wants to explore something else in the cave. Watching the stream from his home, Hawk Eyes pays close attention to everything. He remembers that John said to collaborate, and that was something the boss didn't do. John mentioned that when it came to succeeding in his stream, it was only possible to control half of the things. Hokwai knew that popularity would be measured by the types of players that existed. Subaru's stream felt less like a veteran talking to fans and more like a calm vlog. Narukami was still a beginner streamer, so Hokwai just needed to do what he knew. This was a chance to ride a meteor coming at high speed, and make him a shining star in the sky. People said that Hokwai stayed in the analyses because he didn't have the confidence to climb the tower. But the truth was that, like everyone else, he also wanted to reach for the stars. For a moment, he began to dream of being like Subaru and lost a bit of focus on the stream. He gets scared and quickly goes back to work, but sees that he missed something very important. Back to the protagonist's stream, he is still walking, but the closer he gets to the end, the more injuries he has. Subaru doesn't stop or complains of pain. Instead, he walks and endures everything in silence. It is said that the most powerful lightning is the one that penetrates deepest into the body. Now the hero has walked enough to have electricity within his heart and meridians. With progress at around 20%, the meridians are opened and the hero gains a point of magical power. Random meridians are concepts of power, and just as the smaller meridians are like veins running through the body, opening them is like unclogging the entrances. In other words, the power of thunder entered the protagonist's entire body. Hosoi never went through the process of removing the impurities from the meridians, so the hero was improvising. Normally, this is done with a person's own magical power, because using an external power is dangerous and brings excruciating pain. Even while bleeding profusely, the protagonist continues to move toward his goal. Rina feels sad watching this scene at home. She watches in silence. As a player, the girl knows what the hero is doing, but she doesn't know the reason. While moving his body, he is basically sucking an external power instead of his own magic. Everyone knows that the pain is immense and that usually, a person faints immediately. Even though death in the exam isn't a reality, the pain is real. So the girl almost cries, wanting to know why he is going so far. With 50% progress, the opening of the smaller meridians is more or less complete. Therefore, the hero realizes he made a mistake. He was feeling so bad that he thought he was going to die and fail. In the past, Subaru often said that there was no challenge that couldn't be overcome. That was how he motivated his teammates, because in the end, he always won. But now he was regretting everything. For the hero, if he hadn't spoken with such arrogance, maybe none of them would have died with him. To make matters worse, Subaru remembers that the last words he heard from the blonde were about being arrogant. All of this was his fault, and he kept walking as far as he could. But eventually, the hero falls face first to the ground and can no longer even move his arms properly. After fainting, the protagonist wakes up in a green field with his old body and unsure of where he is. But when he turns around, he sees all his companions having some sort of picnic and is shocked. Shuhei, Sauda, Kei, Iori, Shigure, and Rena are all there together. So, despite it seeming very much like a dream, he runs to his friends. When he gets very close, Subaru starts to cry because everything feels so real. He laughs and says he had a terrible dream and wants to tell his companions, but his friends respond by accusing the hero of causing their deaths. Subaru becomes desperate, and the girl who was stabbed by the blonde asks why he didn't protect them after boasting so much about being good. A kind of red fire transforms the picnic's campfire. Subaru tries to scream and explain himself, but his friends turn into unrecognizable, vengeful souls. The hero screams even louder, begging his companions not to leave him alone, and he becomes so desperate that he kneels on the ground and pleads, but an explosion ends everything. Back in the real world, Subaru wakes up realizing he went through a hallucination. With progress at 97%, he is still very injured but close to the end. So, despite the hallucination being bad, he is grateful for remembering the reason he is alive and what Kazuki did. In the test village that is about to be attacked, the entire population stands with the knights prepared to defend themselves, even though they are terrified, because at least one of the giants has already passed the wall. The knights are trying to find where the real boss is. They also say that the hero must have fled, but Peleus shouts that he hasn't. First, they entrusted the future of the village to a stranger, and then they doubted the leader. That's why the blonde asked if the complainers weren't ashamed to call themselves knights. Dale quickly states that the leader is right, and that before blaming anyone, they need to protect the village. He draws his sword with magical energy and asserts that knights must protect and not be protected. Then, taking the front line, Dale and Peleus rush to face the monsters, willing to die with honor. At that moment, the protagonist finally reaches 99% progress. He manages to see a kind of core of electrical energy and guesses that it is the objective of the test. The problem is that his fatigue is also almost at 100%, but being so close doesn't let him give up. Back in the battle at the village, Dale runs at full speed, and using his sword, he cuts the leg of a giant. The monster screams in pain when hit and tries to grab the old man, but fails. Then the blonde comes from behind, asking his colleague to leave the rest to him and climbs up the giant's body. Thus, when he reaches the height of the neck, he jumps over and cuts the giant from all directions. The giant is exterminated in a second and falls backward, defeated, unable to do anything. Seeing this makes the knights start to have a little hope. They go to the monster's body to vent their anger and fear. Then Peleus says that now that they have killed the most powerful giant, they can rest. But Dale, unfortunately, warns that this was not the boss they were talking about. While they still don't know, the other knights are surprised by the ease of the challenge. One of them thought things would get easier now, but suddenly he was crushed. Peleus and Dale can see from afar only the shadow, but the blonde already understands that this enemy is on another level. Returning to the protagonist, the progress reaches 99.99%, and he manages to hold that core of electric energy. That's why Subaru shouts that this will be the first step of his revenge. An explosion of electric energy occurs, but it passes, and when it passes, it seems he has finally managed to finish. However, at the moment he was relaxing, a shock ran through Subaru's body because the opening of the smaller meridians was completed. If he had been hit one more time by anything else, he would have died. But, luckily, the protagonist only fainted after completing the 6th stage. From afar, John is bothered by how the protagonist always goes to the limit, because he thinks he doesn't know when to stop transmitting. In a call with the Falcon Eyes, the two say they were watching Subaru's live stream now, but Hokwai shouts over the boss that the hero is going to become a star, and a star both as a player and as a streamer, just like in the case of Narukami Ko. Hokwai says that what the hero is doing is what the audience wants because it is closer to reality. After all, the true leader of the Blue Eyes was a player and not a streamer, which means they would be witnessing the birth of a new Subaru live. Back to the protagonist's broadcast, after some time on the ground, he manages to get up. His whole body aches from fatigue. It is at 81 out of 100, but Subaru's stats have risen, and since he passed the 6th stage, he gained several credits from his viewers. Now the protagonist has about 20,000 of them, which is half of what he needs to increase the level of the greed bet. At least now he has the key to defeat the giants, an item called the Spear of Lightning that is legendary and that no one in the chat knows. Even though it is for one-time use, this is something that can only be found around the 8th floor. Therefore, the protagonist keeps it for now, saying that items of this level can change depending on the conditions, and finally starts to head outside the cave to defeat those things. Returning to the attack on the village, the knights encounter a monster the size of a building. This is the true giant that should be defeated, and already very close to the walls. The monster king Grog screams very loudly. At that moment, a knight runs away and Pellis questions what he is doing. Then the boy cries, saying he warned them that they didn't know the size of the problem. At that moment, he goes to the feet of the monster kneeling, and pleads for the giant to have mercy on his life. But, unfortunately for the boy, the giant feels offended by having a worm asking for something. Dale goes to help his companion get up and leave. He tells the two to run. However, he stayed there too long, and when the blonde shouted trying to warn, Grog stepped on both of them, killing them instantly. Peleus's motivation begins to fade, because he sees no way to win or escape. In fact, everyone there is trapped like birds in a cage. Peleus is scared at first, but then becomes even angrier. He screams desperately that he knows who killed the giant's son, and this manages to catch Grog's attention. As the giant asks where the murderer is, the blonde trembles but points his sword to a place saying that is where Subaru went. Obviously, the boy sends the monster to the wrong region, but he was no fool and figured out that the knight was lying. Therefore, Grog asks if the human who killed his son is not there or if Peleus tried to deceive him. He was going to kill the knight for that, but a lightning bolt struck the mountain, catching the attention of the giant and the knight. In fact, it caught everyone's attention because it was something enormous, so much so that Peleus thought it was the protagonist at that moment. From the top of the mountain, our hero initiates stage 7 called Lightning, which is the last of the test, because if anything stronger than this appeared, it wouldn't be possible to defeat it on the 2nd floor. Finally, the hero isn't afraid and says that there's no need to think too much because he will defeat the monster with one attack. For now, Grog is stronger than the hero, so he needs to attack first. At that moment, the protagonist activates the lightning spear, and the power is so great that it changes the clouds in the sky. The spear creates a red stormy sky with black thunder, just with 10% of the total activation. The protagonist's fatigue rises, but the item materializes in his hand. At 33%, it starts to form the image of a black lightning spear. But, unfortunately, the gamble of greed can't eliminate the negative effects. Subaru understands that he still doesn't have the strength for a legendary item, and the fatigue reaches 88 with 50% activation. After a while, the protagonist realizes that the monster has noticed him on the mountain. But it was obvious that he would attract attention after making so much noise. Grog no longer pays attention to the blonde, because seeing those lightning bolts made him sure that the killer of his son was that man. Peleus shouts, trying to get the monster's attention, but it doesn't work. Although he had something else to worry about now, because the village was full of smaller giants. Grog focuses on that light on the mountain and thinks that his son must have suffered a lot. So, he runs like a madman, shouting that he will make sure the hero feels at least a piece of that. The monster knocks down trees and everything in its path, and the protagonist is already 88% ready. He knows it will be a shot of everything or nothing, and that he might miss. But because of that, he doesn't take his eyes off the target. In the past, a teammate gave this tip, telling the hero not to get distracted when he wanted to throw a spear. The tip was to throw in a straight line and discard all unnecessary thoughts. The boy also said that what mattered was the shape of the spear, especially since the hero was different from the other spear throwers. After all, he was the leader of the Blue Eyes. With 95.2% of the skill prepared, Subaru is still worried, but he remembers the advice for when he wasn't going to throw a normal spear. In that case, the boy said that instead of throwing, he should detonate it. When the monster gets very close, the chat gets desperate, urging the protagonist to throw it already. But his strategy is to wait until the last moment. So the monster continues climbing, and at one point, it leaps towards the hero. It lands right on top of Subaru, so the hero focuses hard on the monster, and when the preparation reaches 100%, he is ready to attack. He only has one chance, so all he thinks is that he needs to hit regardless of what happens. The hero's arm burns with the lightning, but he throws it when the giant is just a few meters away from touching him. Thus, he manages to prevent Grog from dodging, hitting his forehead and making the monster fall instantly. When the lightning struck the giant, he exploded, and while being incinerated, Grog shouted his son's name until he disappeared. In the end, everyone in the chat can't believe that Subaru won. Stage 7 is completed, and all the protagonists' stats increase. Thus, he also receives a reward called Heart of Thunder. Subaru is confused, but that item activates on its own and makes a strong light appear. Suddenly, the protagonist opens his eyes in a place he doesn't recognize, and in front of him appears a shadow of a giant. He tries to scream, but his voice doesn't come out at all. Moreover, the protagonist's body doesn't move either. Besides that giant, several other nameless shadows appear around Subaru, staring at him. It seems they are trying to show something to the hero, but his hand starts to shine, and a beam of light sends that place away. Then, back on the mountain, the system announces that the main mission has begun. It informs that the hero can look for clues in the village using the Heart of Thunder. Subaru still doesn't understand if this was real or part of the challenge. Anyway, he apologizes for having ignored the chat for a while, and he quickly moves on to the important part, which is accepting the credits he earned. Thus, he manages to gather a little over 40,000. Then, at that moment, the hero pretends to be tired and turns off the stream. In a bar in the starting city, the protagonist asks if it's normal to end the live like that, but Hatsuka says yes. As she didn't mention it, she informs him that his stream surpassed 3,000 viewers. Subaru is shocked that he was so focused on the exam that he didn't notice. In any case, the girl says that for a beginner's exam, this is incredible, and the hero understands that cutting off at an important moment leaves the audience curious to see more. Subaru surprises the girl by saying he wants to see the rewards with the subscribers in the next live to be authentic. Then Hatsuka starts to think he has got the hang of it, and that's why she warns him that she has a gift for him. But a gift she thinks the protagonist cannot refuse because it is quite special. The girl tells the hero to look for the streamer called Hawkeyes, so he agrees. As soon as he enters the guy's stream, he's just starting. And the title is a speculation about whether the protagonist is the second Subaru or maybe the original. While he was taking the exam, this person also gave a challenge to the hero. After taking a while, Hokwai quickly says he will need to explain a lot. What he says is that the protagonist is Subaru with another name, and that he is sure of it. The hero is curious to know if the manager is thinking the same. Anyway, the girl asks to make a question that might be rude. She knows it is the manager's duty to say this and knows it is wrong, but still doesn't change her mind. Hatsuka asks why the protagonist is a streamer. She questions because she thinks it is not for the money, so he thinks for a bit, leaving the girl with her heart racing. But he says it is indeed for the money and that there is no other reason. Hatsuka feels even more embarrassed. She agrees that money is important and apologizes for the question. Therefore, to try to make him forget about it, she starts talking about the rewards. Hatsuka gives some information about Hokwai, like him being a long-time contractor, and lays out everything they plan together for Subaru's future. It was decided that Hokwai would share the profits with the boy because he would do reacts to his lives. Then Subaru happily says he only hears good news in this agency. The girl gets embarrassed and he says this is not a normal bonus. That's why Hatsuka asked if Subaru would want to work with Hawkeyes. On the way home, the first thing the protagonist thinks is that maybe he shouldn't keep wearing the mask all the time, and that he doesn't need to focus on wanting money. He feels embarrassed, but the more he builds new relationships, the less he knows what he should hide. In any case, for now, with these 40,000 credits, he raises the greed bet to level 4. However, now with only 120 credits, he will need more money. At least when he lies down, he remembers that he will have the collaboration with Hawkeyes. Speaking of which, he takes out that flower he got from the museum, thinking that his companion must already know. In the manager's room at the company, she hides her face in the pillow even when alone because, for some reason, she got excited by what Subaru said. Her mind invented the reason for him wanting money, that the boy must have someone sick or something like that. Therefore, despite being curious, she shouted that she wouldn't ask anymore. In fact, the moment Subaru said that only good things had happened was also striking. So she replied that she also liked him, venting her feelings with a punch on the bed. And she ended up with the impression that Subaru was a wonderful and noble person. Sometime later, on the 7th floor of the tower, inside a castle, a person trains his body. Meanwhile, he watches the stream of Hawkeyes, who said that the hero was like the Subaru of the past. However, this guy doesn't like that, especially since he doesn't even know who the streamer is from the comments. A subordinate informs that it is a rookie who already has an average of 8,000 views, so the Blue Zone guy remembers that he did that in the past too. As they talk about the player, he understands that Subaru is the guy who supposedly mastered electricity. From what he sees in the recording of the stream, he agrees that it is impressive, because it reminds him of what Sako Shuhei used to say, "Do not let your eyes stray when throwing a spear." Amon explains that he tried to learn everything from the Blue-Eyed Lancer. After all, everyone who was part of that guild was the best of the best. For some reason, people forgot that it wasn't just Subaru who was a monster, and that their deaths were suspicious. Hokuai continued saying that he didn't need to explain anything more. Then Amon and the subordinate get irritated, thinking that the streamer is trying to go viral. The player turns off the TV immediately and asks why he had to watch that program. However, the subordinate explains that it was the guild leader who requested it. The thunder is the symbol of the blue eyes, and the blue eyes are the mother guild of the Blue Zone. The subordinate says they managed to get information about the hero being crazy for money. That's why he takes a cloth off a pallet and shows the player 100 gold bars. Then Amon is startled, but not because they are going to spend so much on the contract, but because Subaru only wants cash. Returning to the Thunderpath challenge, since the city is destroyed, people need to fix everything. The blonde leads the knights to help treat the injured and distribute medicine, but that worried face becomes happy when he sees the protagonist arriving after the battle. Pelias says they were very worried when he fainted in front of the village. Then, the hero says he still feels a bit unwell, and the friend understands. Changing the subject, the hero asks to talk a bit, so the blonde suggests they chat later. This makes Subaru think it's really nice, and the chat wants the two to get married. Back in his room, the protagonist starts looking at the rewards. First, there was that heart of electricity that increased resistance to thunder and the power of electric attacks, but no one in the chat knows if the protagonist is happy or sad about it. Subaru was left speechless because the item was perfect for an electricity user. It was really amazing. Finally, the blonde knocks on his door, so he tells him to come in. What's different is that the knight enters with a basket of fruit in hand, and asking if the protagonist rested well, as if he were his girlfriend. Anyway, the two don't touch the fruit and go to talk. Subaru asks if the legends were true, then the blonde says apparently yes, and thanks him. That's why the hero mentions he found something on the giant's body, an item called the Heart of Thunder, which greatly frightens the blonde. Subaru obviously asks if the friend knows anything, but he says no, which, after that scare, doesn't fool anyone. Pelias tries to say that all his knowledge comes from legends that are usually lies, but he says he at least remembers two legends well. The first was that the Bearer of Thunder would appear and defeat the giant, just as the protagonist did by defeating their leader. And the second was from long ago, when gods and giants fought over thunder. This was more like a legend within legends, and it spoke about the war that happened where the giants were defeated. So, this Heart of Thunder of the protagonist was probably created by someone. The creator doesn't appear in the legends, but seems to have a purpose. Pelias says it's for humans to be able to use lightning, and that they need it to be able to fight against the gods and giants. That's why the blonde believes this is an item to level the playing field. When the story ends, the system announces that the Thunder Path is over. The hero earns 17,000 achievement points that increase his thunder skill to level 3. His body begins to shine, and the blonde becomes desperate. Then, suddenly, the protagonist disappears and is teleported to the 3rd floor called Ordinarl. He materializes there with a kind of teleportation base. The players see the protagonist there but are fed up because he is wearing the Narukami mask. Love or Hatsuka sends 1,000 credits congratulating the hero, but he doesn't respond because he remembers a memory there. In the past, when he first arrived on the 3rd floor, it was where he met Rina. She was embarrassed because she had lost her friends, so she asked if the hero had seen someone tall like him or maybe even a bigger palm. Then, the hero said he had seen, pointing to a corner and saying they must have gone that way. Rina ran immediately, but 2 steps forward she was already lost again and didn't know where to go. Seeing this, the hero called the girl to go together to find those friends, which made Rina very happy. But it wasn't as if the protagonist had anything else to do. Thus, the two introduced themselves. But despite it being a nice moment, he thought that if he hadn't helped, maybe she would still be alive. The chat asks what Subaru's feeling, but the hero doesn't explain well because he feels very guilty. So, just to inform that the next broadcast will be with the Hawkeyes, he ends there. In a restaurant on the 3rd floor, someone appears at the protagonist's table after a while, apologizing for the delay. John comes in place of Hatsuka because, aside from when the system moves someone up a floor, it takes time to travel. Anyway, he introduces himself as the director of the entertainment company. Then, the hero says he has heard of him from the manager. Normally, the president leaves these conversations to Hatsuka, but he wanted to see the hero in person, especially since he was the second to make the girl so excited. And, logically, John said that the first one was the blue-eyed Subaru. The president says that the girl has very high demands to be interested in someone, and he also asks to make a different question. He asks if the protagonist is interested in a guild called Blue Eyes, and he is shocked. From the reaction, the blonde realizes that the boy is interested. In fact, this is one of the reasons the president wanted to see him. And another reason was that in 5 days, the reward for a tournament on the 3rd floor would be released. But when the protagonist sees what John is talking about, he gets very irritated. When our hero finished the live stream, Rina complained that it ended too early. She got curious and went out to stroll in the forest in front of the cabin. Then, after a while, when she found Shiger, she asked if she was done, and the girl replied that yes. Rina asks what her friend is doing. Then she says she is thinking. Because in front of the two, there are some warriors who have frozen, and she still doesn't know if she should kill them or let them live. Rina says that her friend should kill them, but the other isn't sure, especially because, if it were Kazuki's doing, he wouldn't send small fish. But leaving these assassins alive could also be a problem. Rina, for her part, doesn't like the idea of their location being exposed by these guys. Because of this, she summons several blades from the ground with her magic, and using a hand gesture, aligns them all. Shiger tries to shout for her friend not to do anything, but Rina doesn't even think. She throws those blades at the frozen warriors, destroying all of them. Until in the end, only some pieces of ice remain. Rina says that, regardless of whether it's the blonde's doing or not, they can't send assassins back. She also says that her friend's indecision is bad and that she needs to be more rational. Changing the subject, a message arrives on Shigeru's player kit, but when Rina sees what it is, she is first shocked and then very furious. The two get irritated, but Rina much more so, especially since they were selling Toshia's shoes. Shigeru calms her friend down by saying it's a trap to catch them. Some know that they are alive somewhere, but even so, they can't just do nothing, and Rina understands what her friend is saying. Shigeru claims she isn't good at doing things secretly, but that her friend is. Then, Rina says that her colleague talks too much and that she already knows what she has to do. Before, Shigeru grabs her arm, explaining that she doesn't want the girl to go in recklessly, because, in fact, she thinks it's better to steal when the winner is decided. Returning to the conversation with the hero, what John showed that weighed on the mood were the same shoes. He thought Subaru would be interested, and the protagonist really wanted to be. But he wanted it a lot, not for the reason the president thought. In this case, John says that it will depend on the result he achieves. The president says that, since the hero is a fan of Subaru, they can create content by going after this item. But the protagonist was only thinking that it was very bold to use Toshia's items as the prize for anything. John doesn't understand all this anger from the hero and becomes worried. Then, Subaru says he will follow the content idea, which cheers the president up a bit more. At that moment, the hero stands up saying he will go get things ready. Then, John shouts from afar that he will be cheering for him. But Subaru didn't even hear because he was just thinking that he had to get that item at all costs. In the protagonist's room, he thinks about what kind of event this tournament will be. Subaru thinks it will be good if it's something individual, but he also knows he can't be that demanding. Suddenly, Hatsuka knocks on his door. As the manager finally arrives, the hero stands up and thinks about grabbing the mask. Thus, the two meet, and Hatsuka is well-dressed and embarrassed as always. The problem was that the protagonist was wearing the mask up to that point. Subaru invites the girl in, and she almost explodes with embarrassment. But to him, it doesn't make sense not to come in if it's to talk, so the girl accepts, still with a very red face. Inside, before they exchange a few words, Hatsuka observes that his room is quite minimalist. She feels shy because he doesn't say anything, but what the hero thinks is that the girl's mana is huge and that she isn't a normal manager. Hatsuka asks if there is something wrong with her face, but the hero says it's nothing and starts asking about the tournament. Then she pulls out some papers, apologizing. Hatsuka explains that the tournament will be in a battle royale format where several players will fight for a prize. Like in an individual competition for the hero's luck, Hatsuka warns that the gym will be in the virtual exam area and that participants need to be at the 3rd level and pay 1,000 credits. Additionally, she has already sent the materials to the hero, so when he looks in the kit, he has an idea of what he needs. Subaru thanks her a lot, but she says it's just her job. Moreover, the girl asks if the protagonist heard the message from the director. It's because they had sent him a message from the blue zone. At that moment, the protagonist remembers the damn Kyojo Kazuki and starts trembling with anger. The girl says they want to meet the hero and that they sent an email to the company. They probably want to meet the boy and negotiate by offering better payments. But Hatsuka can't believe it when Subaru tells her to ignore them. The hero said he had no intention of joining this or any other guilds. That's why the girl celebrated as if she had just won a big prize. She confesses that she was afraid to tell him and that Subaru would end up leaving. But since he didn't want to, Hatsuka tells the hero to enjoy the collaboration with Hokwai and leaves celebrating. In the end, for an employee to be so dedicated to her work, Subaru thinks well of her, even though the girl is like that for other reasons. In a place that looks like a stage, the president waits with the Hawkeyes. Today's event was going to be the original versus the Subaru of now in a talent comparison. Hokwai comments that it seems like good entertainment, but John thinks that if the hero loses, it will look bad. Still, the streamer has no doubt about the skills he has seen and remembers that so far he hasn't lost a fight. In the end, both understand that it will depend on the protagonist's effort. Then, at that moment, the manager arrives greeting both of them with Subaru right behind. Hokwai is also happy because this is a chance to become more famous, so he extends his hand to the hero, and since he seems not to be paying much attention, he introduces himself. Thus, the protagonist greets the guy, and Hokwai says he is a fan of his, even though he is a newbie. John asks to save that talk for later and to start the broadcast right away. Then Hawkeye's starts with 1,300 people live saying hi to everyone. At that moment, the views jump from 1,300 to 120,000, which, while good, is concerning. Anyway, he remembers that today is the collaboration everyone is waiting for. And listening, the protagonist appears on the screen and introduces himself, making people curious about his face. That's why Hokwai says that neither he nor the manager saw it, but at least the protagonist answers the question, saying he is quite handsome. Hawkeye's is going to be anxious because the hype in the live stream keeps growing. He sees that the vibe is really cool, and Subaru also responds that he doesn't have a girlfriend, which relieves Hatsuka. Anyway, without further ado for the main event, with 20,000 people live, they start the test. A bunch of lights turn on, and several battle robots are shown in the gym. To explain the reason for the test, the streamer warns that it is perfect to know the control the hero has, and that secondly, it's good because the record of the real Subaru is still there. As the chat asks, the hero says he thinks he can beat the record. Then, finally, those stationary war machines suddenly start moving and all jump towards the protagonist. Despite everything the hero has done, the chat doesn't trust much that he will beat the record. Some are in doubt, but everyone is very excited. One viewer leaves a mission of 10,000 credits if the hero kills 43, but he doesn't accept because if he loses, he has to take off the mask. The problem is that other people put in more credits, so Subaru ends up accepting. And since the live stream is from Hawkeye's, he warns that they don't need to worry because everything won will go to the hero. Thus, he asks the protagonist to pay attention and starts the show. It will be 3 minutes of fighting, and at that moment, several killer machines jump on Subaru. He activates his thunder power and starts defeating several at once, then grabs one machine's head and crushes it into the ground. Everyone is shocked that the hero eliminates the enemy without needing to use the sword. But he draws the demonic sword and manages to cut down half a dozen in one attack. The chat is stunned, but the machines keep appearing and coming at the protagonist. After 1 minute of the 3 minutes, he jumps over the enemies, just like he used to in the past. So, in an aerial battle, he grabs the demonic sword, channels lightning power into it, and strikes the ground, sending all the nearby machines flying away. In half the time, the hero has already managed to kill 26, which was quite close to second place. Then the chat started crying over the credits they were about to lose. On the scoreboard, with 13 seconds left, Subaru has 41 kills, and he continues to defeat those machines. With one more sword attack, he makes 42 kills, but he gets tired, and with only 3 seconds left, he knows he needs to keep going. So the boy uses all the strength he has and defeats one more enemy. Thus, time runs out and the gym scoreboard shows 43 kills. The challenge ends, and although the hero didn't kill any more, since he tied the record, it now rises to the top. This was a historic moment, so the stream already had 40,000 viewers. Hokwai runs out, unable to believe that the protagonist tied. He almost faints from excitement, and the chat starts to respect the hero more. Moreover, they also respect Hokwai more for seeing that he isn't a sycophant. Anyway, the streamer announces again that he is streaming on his profile, but suddenly Reinhardt sends a gift of 10,000 credits, and it drives all the viewers, besides the Hawkeyes, completely crazy. Hokwai can hardly thank him properly for having a ranker watching his live, and Subaru remembers who he is. In another gift, the ranker sends a message saying he always watches the hero's streams. Because of this, the protagonist thinks that his father must have found out what he did. But continuing, Reinhardt asks if the boy is interested in doing a collab. There's a silence when this proposal comes. John and Hatsuka signal for the protagonist to accept, but he declines, saying he needs to focus on his goals for now, which almost makes everyone have a heart attack. After saying this, Subaru changes the subject, asking his friend to clean up the mess, and leaves without saying anything more. John and Hatsuka ask why the protagonist didn't accept. John explains that collaborating with rankers of this level is something that almost never happens. However, the protagonist says that if it's really that important, he will become one, and there's an awkward silence once again. Hokwai quickly says that everything was very good and that he will send the boys money, but he also asks to make a question. The streamer comments that Subaru didn't seem as well as in previous times, so Subaru is surprised that he noticed. And since there's no way to escape, he explains that whether he won or lost, he was screwed. In fact, the focus of the live was to grow more, But breaking all the records wasn't good. If he had won, he would gain quick fame, but the rivalry would die. Now, if he had lost, people would say that Subaru was a braggart. That's why the hero sought a result that wouldn't cause any problems. Staying right on the fence was what he thought would be best. Thus, Hokuai asks if the protagonist could have broken the record. But Subaru also decides to leave his friends curious. After all, he could no longer change the result, and now it would only depend on how people would interpret it. At the ranker's house, he gets furious and punches his own table. This is number 121 inches, the ranking called Reinhardt, the leader of the Golden Lion Guild. As soon as the Hawk Eyes finishes the live, a subordinate enters, scared, asking if something is wrong. Then the blonde warns that he is furious with this rookie Subaru. Reinhardt informs that the boy simply refused his offer. He intended to defeat him in front of everyone and put an end to these rumors. Reinhardt doesn't care at all about the credits he lost. It was more about his pride. Anyway, the subordinate grabs the master's player kit and returns it to him. Then the blonde asks about the other thing he requested. It was about Isak, and they were still looking for him, but he had already disappeared a few days ago. Because of this, the ranker grabs the subordinate by the throat and lifts him off the ground with force. Then he asks if the henchman is trying to mess with him too. The subordinate almost loses consciousness, and at the last second, the ranker throws him against a wall. Thus, the boy falls to the ground very hurt, but Reinhardt continues asking if he will complain. Therefore, at that moment, the boy kneels, begging for another chance. The next day, Hatsuka calls the boss and seems quite tired. When he answers, she says good morning, but John immediately starts cursing her out because the girl can't hide her unenthusiastic voice and have an important conversation right now. John talks non-stop, but the girl quickly gets to the subject of the collaboration with Reinhardt. She asks if they really need to do it, but the boss's opinion is very clear. Hatsuka has to try to convince him. Honestly, John says that the protagonist's mindset is good for a player, but the girl hangs up because she has already made up her mind. The girl can't stop thinking that this will be a good opportunity for the hero, so she wants to try to convince him. When the doorbell rings, the protagonist opens it looking like he has a clean face, but in reality, he is still wearing the mask. Subaru asks if the girl wants to see his face, then she says no, but starts talking so much that it seems like she does. That's why the hero asks why everyone is so obsessed with Subaru. Hatsuka replies that it might be because he was born with bad status or just because he is nice, but also because he was their hope. The girl explains that the protagonist may not know, but the first time he climbed the tower, there was nothing. You could only see monsters everywhere, no money or food, and it was a miracle to survive. But when a person climbed, they earned credits, and gradually, humanity changed the place. In the past, it was the great players who created the hope that the tower could be conquered, that it was a world they could enter. And the one who played the biggest role in that was Narukame Subaru, because his achievements were not just about climbing floors, but being the first person to prove it was possible. The hero asks if the girl thinks that way too, but about that, she says she will keep it a secret, just like the boy with the mask. Anyway, Subaru apologizes for them talking there, inviting the girl to come in, but she gets very embarrassed, says she is leaving, and this time, she really does. In the end, she couldn't talk to Subaru about the collab, but she was much more shy because the boy invited her in every time. Sometime later, the hero goes live, and immediately a bunch of people sends paid messages to him about collaborations. People also want to know which faction he will choose on the third floor, basically paying to get some good information. At the beginning of the third floor test, the system lets you choose between the Ottoman Kingdom and Conrad. The faction changes everything on that floor because each kingdom hates the other, so the hero chooses the Conrad Kingdom, which has 3% of the players choosing it. In the resting area of the Conrad mercenaries on the third floor, the protagonist enters and they immediately focus on him. A bully was waiting to find a newbie to mess with, so he goes up to the hero and bumps into his shoulder. The problem is that the one who goes back is the guy, and he almost falls to the ground as if he had hit a wall. The bully shouts, asking where the hero is going and questions what his problem is. But the hero says he is the one with the problem because he bumped into him. At that moment, the boy grabs Subaru by the shirt to hit him a few times. This is Vulture, who is known for intimidating E-rank mercenaries. He says he is a B-rank mercenary, but the protagonist simply activates the lightning at his feet and delivers a killer kick to the bully's chin. Thus, he flies away all crumpled, and when he hits the ground, everyone in the bar stops laughing. Some are scared, and others are interested. But Vulture's friends don't like this at all, and they cowardly join together to hit the hero. The problem is that a few more weaklings don't make a difference, so Subaru kicks the butts of all of them. In the end, the person who was interested came to praise Subaru, and he also introduced himself as Raymond, who is an A-rank examiner. The man asks what the hero has done, but since he is an E-rank mercenary, he says nothing much. The third floor test is to take on various jobs as a mercenary and earn 10,000 AP. The problem is that completing an E-rank mission barely gives 50 of those points, so players spend a year there. Raymond realizes that the protagonist is from another world and says there aren't many of them around. Even so, he says he can't give special treatment to the boy, especially since he is leaving. Subaru, however, knows a way to pass faster that he wants to test now. He says he can fulfill a man's dreams and explains that he is talking about making the Thunder Cave belong to the Conrads. Raymond shouts immediately because only A-rank mercenaries take jobs there. But the hero knows that it is also a battle of pride between the two kingdoms. The Thunder Cave is a special floor on the 3rd level, which no mercenary or knight has managed to clear. Between the two kingdoms lies a giant mountain that both have been trying to conquer for decades. Conquering the Thunder Cave located there means gaining a passage through the mountain and achieving military advantage. That's why the hero says he will clear the place if he earns a rank, a title. Raymond thinks a lot because the boy might take advantage, and the hero considers taking out the old man if he wants to cause trouble. However, that's not necessary because Raymond says he will write a letter of recommendation. After all, raids always need strong men fighting. Thus, Raymond warns that the protagonist needs to wait for the group in 5 days. Suddenly, 3 subscribers of the hero send a total of 35,000 credits for him to clear the dungeon alone. Unfortunately, in 5 days would be exactly when the tournament would end. Raymond, for his part, still says he can't believe it. He confesses that he challenged the cave when he was younger but lost half of his group. Then he gives the letter. But the hero says that this won't happen again because he plans to go alone. Raymond shouts that the boy is crazy because the minimum to challenge the place is 20 people. But Subaru calms the old man a bit, giving the excuse that he doesn't want to use their forces. And he warns that he has no comrades, but for a short time. At the top of a mountain, Rina comments that she is increasingly impressed with how much the hero resembles Subaru. She watches the live stream, and the protagonist says he won't take on other missions. In fact, he says he will stop streaming for a while. And he simply turns off when Rina was enjoying watching on her way to the 3rd floor. But she also finds it funny because the real Subaru would do the same. He simply does what he wants, exactly as it would be if his former leader were a streamer. And since he somehow learned that the hero will also participate in the tournament, he thinks it's good to have a chat, and obviously hopes he won't manage to get the item. Later, on the 3rd floor, Hatsuka praises the hero, happily saying that the protagonist has gotten the hang of imitating Subaru. If he also just took on some normal jobs, it wouldn't be fun to watch. Hatsuka asks what the boy will do next, then he says he will hunt until the tournament starts. After all, he also wants to gauge how much thunder he can use with his current level, and then fight to prevent someone else from getting his companion's item. In the afternoon, Ginzaki Naoto from Blue Zone looks for Subaru, very irritated about having to talk to him. He doesn't care if the boy conquered the thunder because he didn't even want to be on this floor. Anyway, when he enters a bar, it's John who is waiting, sitting with a good beer. The two sit down to talk, and the president says he knows Ginzaki wants contact with one of his streamers. Ginzaki, for his part, gets furious just that the protagonist isn't there. John warns that he is taking care of his own business, but the Blue Zone guy doesn't think there's anything more important than his guild. Anyway, the president reminds him of the declaration the hero made. In fact, Ginzaki wanted to talk to him personally to negotiate better, but he starts to think that it's John who is making it difficult for the two to meet. Ginzaki bangs on the table, saying he can see when someone wants to keep the golden goose. But he asserts that the hero will be better off in a big guild rather than streaming. The problem is that John disagrees on this point, especially since he knows Ginzaki for going after players who work streaming. Ginzaki tries to say that he doesn't want to make Blue Zone an enemy of Shounen, but John warns that they prioritize their employees and their decisions above all else. For an adult man, Ginzaki says that the president is being very naive. However, John counters by saying that in this world, there are people who are not intimidated, and showing a bit of his aura, tells the young man to leave. Ginzaki immediately feels the pressure of the president's power and stands up, trembling a bit. He shouts that John can't just order him to leave as if it were nothing, and the president doesn't care at all. That's why Ginzaki warns that he will make the old man regret it, but John even mocks him, saying he is scared to death. 3 days later, on the 3rd floor, in the nest of sky serpents, a big mess happens because of the hero. Without needing to wear the mask, he hunts one of the largest snakes in the nest. With one attack, he opens a hole in the monster's mouth, making it scream in pain. Then the hero returns to his sword and, saying he has already tested enough, advances, saying he will finish this quickly. Thus, the protagonist jumps onto the open mouth of the monster and invokes a very strong thunder that defeats the boss of the sky serpents. The protagonist levels up and his stats do too. Moreover, he gains a serpent fang worth about 10,000 credits. Subaru is now at level 35. He has leveled up 9 times in 3 days, which is very good. For this reason, he now remembers that he had something he left to resolve. The next day, Hatsuka happily greets the protagonist, so he sits down asking if anything good happened. The girl says yes, shining with joy, but the protagonist still doesn't understand what it is. Finally, he remembers it's about the collaboration and apologizes. Hatsuka doesn't blame the hero for refusing because it's also something Subaru would do. But if the goal is to be equal, she hands over a document stating the only difference between the two. In fact, it was a document with money from the live with Hokwai, 49,000 credits. Hatsuka comments that she could have given this at any time, but she wanted to talk to the boy. She says she has a friend named Seijin, a gambling addict who taught her some things. Basically, he works with bets on who will win or lose. The higher the chance, the lower the payout, but it's also a more guaranteed return. About this, Hatsuka explains that the hero's payout rate is 6.1, while a certain player's is 1.2, making him the favorite to win. When the hero asks, the girl says the boy's name is Omar Schneider, a player from the Blue Zone who has been on the 3rd floor for 10 years just to try to clear the Thunder Cave. Hatsuka also says that Omar must be looking for the hero. After all, the statement he made saying he would clear the cave alone was like laughing at his 10 years of effort. First, the hero warns the girl that she is a bit too close. This time, Hatsuka feels more embarrassed than ever, so she goes back to her chair, asking Subaru to just prepare. On the 3rd floor, in a place called Ortonarl, 2 horses pull a cart very quickly. Then they finally arrive where they will meet the arrogant one who said he would clear the dungeon alone. Some colleagues inside say that the boy is only saying this because he doesn't know what it's like in there, and they ask Captain Schneider not to get angry. However, the captain says he isn't, because the hero has some reputation. Despite his career being short, he is the new user of Thunder. Still, the warrior's colleagues say that Subaru is not like the original and that he won't succeed. However, the captain asserts that it's not the time to be envious or jealous. One of the colleagues asks if they want to respect the boy, then Schneider says it might be necessary. But despite wanting to seem calm, it's clear that he is nervous. And the bald guy is the most worried because he knows the monster the captain becomes when he is angry. When he goes to read Schneider's information, the hero thinks he is crazy because he only left there 5 years ago. A news article was saying that they were close to completing it. And now that he knows more about the boy, Subaru understands why he is the favorite. But still, he apologizes to Kazuki because now that he's back, he won't let anything interfere. The next day, in the city's shopping center, a seller says he won't be able to buy such bad material. And, unfortunately, he informs the hunter he brought that he will only pay 1,500 credits. Moreover, he almost gives up selling, but in the end, he tricked the customer because only he knew the product's value. Finally, another customer arrives who is a bit smarter. When Subaru places the serpent fang on the table, the seller almost jumps in shock. There was nothing to complain about regarding the quality, but the seller wasn't going to miss the chance to take advantage. At that moment, the merchant evaluates the material as rank B, and that it would be rank S if it weren't for a scratch. Additionally, he also says that the protagonist arrived at a bad time because he is full of identical items. That said, he has the audacity to offer 8,000 as if it were a lot. In fact, Subaru even thinks it's fair because of the value he remembered from before. However, Schneider appeared there saying it was worth at least 15,000 and debunking the seller's bluff about having several of them. So, with the two facing each other, the captain and the protagonist end up greeting each other. Later, in a rather unconventional restaurant, the two boys sit down to get straight to the point. After all, they are not boyfriends to be relaxing together there. But the hero still doesn't believe that this place is where Schneider comes to have lunch. Finally, the captain soon talks about the Thunder Dungeon, and Subaru reaffirms that he will clear the place alone. Schneider gets irritated and says that many people reach the 3rd floor with their noses in the air. Subaru asks if the captain thinks the same of him, and although he does, he says he respects the hero for his talent. But he still doesn't believe that the hero can be compared to the original Subaru. The protagonist thought he was going to talk to a weirdo, but saw that he was someone serious. Without further ado, the captain reveals that he has a proposal, and grinding his teeth, tells him to take it back. Schneider finally vents that he found the boy's words very arrogant, and that he will give him a chance to go live and apologize. However, the hero says he doesn't think it's a very good proposal. Then, the captain asserts that he will defeat the boy in the tournament and make him understand his place. Therefore, Subaru agrees, but if he wins, he asks the captain to write a report on everything he knows about the dungeon, which, despite being a lot of work, Schneider doesn't mind because he thinks he will win, or at least not lose to the protagonist, so he leaves, making the hero think that Schneider must not have spent 10 years there for nothing. At the entertainment company Shounen, Sagan jumps in surprise when he sees over 10,000 people live. He was watching the start of the tournament broadcast and feels envious because he can't participate since he has already passed the 3rd floor. Although the hero is their ally, Sagan thinks it's better to bet on the captain. However, as a professional gambler, he also believes he shouldn't follow the crowd, but rather bet on what he believes. The problem is that he starts trembling in fear of making a mistake. But when he was about to change his bet, he accidentally answers a call and throws his phone away, thinking he had accidentally bet on Subaru. Seijin shouts that Hatsuka is spying on him, but the girl just asks what he is doing. Sagan tries not to make it clear that he was betting, but the girl focuses on wanting to know what's happening because she thinks they should bet everything on Subaru. The boy says they can't be that naive because they need to analyze before betting. Sagan yells that Schneider is a much more rational option than Hatsuka's crush. Hatsuka doesn't back down and bets next month's salary on who will be right. But in the middle of the conversation, someone in a hood passes by, making her lose focus. Therefore, the girl hangs up on her friend without saying anything more, which leaves Sejin confused because the girl isn't the type to propose bets. Walking in the city center, a subordinate of the captain asks what the hero was like. Then Schneider confesses that he was no amateur. The bald man worries about Schneider losing, but this makes the captain want to beat him up, because, for now, he will only be sure when they see each other in the tournament, and Schneider himself doesn't think there's the slightest chance of losing. From the top of a building, a hooded person sees all this. She was already wanting to take a look at the favorite of the competition. It's obviously Rina, and she compliments the boy's sister a bit. Finally, on the day of the tournament, most people head to the Colosseum in the city of Ortonaro. Our hero is already inside the Colosseum and very close to the entrance door. Then he finally shows his face inside and sees that there is a huge audience watching. Apparently, people didn't know that the boy was participating. They wanted to vote for him for second place, but suddenly, the first place appeared. With his spear on his back, the captain prepares, and everyone cheers, showing that they are big fans of him. None of those hundreds of people shout the hero's name, only Schneider's name. And at the moment they release fireworks, a woman appears with patience. This is Mizuha from the Blue Zone Guild, who will be the presenter of the competition. She explains that the tournament will be divided into qualifiers and main events, where the prize will be awarded in the final. The girl says that the shoes were made by Hermes himself, stating that it is a symbol of pride for the guild and a legendary relic of Hibiki Toshiya. Then she invokes him with magic to show everyone. Therefore, the hero mentally asks Toshiya to wait a bit because he swears he will get those shoes back. In the audience, at least Hatsuka is there supporting, hoping he goes live. But strangely, a hooded person from before is next to her, and Hatsuka swears it's the same one she saw earlier. As the girl said, the protagonist starts the live stream inside the tournament. In less than 10 seconds, 3,000 people enter, and he apologizes for disappearing suddenly while noting he can barely read the chat. Then Hatsuka sends a mission of 30,000 credits if the hero wins, and he thanks her even without much support. Mizuha shouts that it's now, and makes more fireworks appear, starting the tournament. Suddenly, she gathers green magic in her hand and creates a giant ball above. Then, the girl explodes it, creating a rain of that magic. This green stuff envelops the entire arena and makes the audience proud of the girl's power. Basically, the girl made day turn to night with a wave of her hands, so now it's in this darkness that the eliminations begin. The challenge system warns that if you die, you're out, and that the round will end when there are 1,000 survivors left. It also states that everyone is an enemy and the game starts with 10,000 participants. Obviously, no one should make the hero a target in the preliminaries. However, just when he was thinking of conserving energy, several people sent money for him to farm aura. Because of this, suddenly a person passes behind the hero, and he tries to flee, knowing he'll be screwed if he tries to fight. But what the hero sees is a walking pile of money running. Out of nowhere, 1,500 people are already eliminated, and the scene cuts to the captain's perspective. He doesn't care about the small fries, and in the elimination, he wants to go after the hero. Suddenly, an arrow almost hits him. There was a guy hiding who tried his luck and got very close. But it wasn't just one guy. No, because he wasn't crazy. The boy had a group of mercenaries. A bald man thinks they shouldn't take the risk, but the leader feels confident because it's several against one. Because of this, Schneider says the plan isn't bad, but they picked the wrong person. Another bald man is the first to try his luck, but when he finishes speaking, his head disappears, and the guy falls to the ground lifeless, driving everyone crazy. No one managed to see how the captain hit the bald man with the spear. But now Schneider doesn't want to know because he's seen many tough guys like them, and now he's eager to show what happens when they mess with him. In one attack, another mercenary is blown up. Then he warns that tricks don't work in the tower, and he warns that the only thing protecting people is their own strength, leaving the enemies terrified. The image of the captain is what's being broadcast to the viewers. He cuts through several of the mercenaries with a single movement. Some tell their colleagues not to run because it's just an exam, but no one listens. Up in the stands, Rina understands that the captain is on another level and could become a great ranker when he climbs the tower. But she gets annoyed because, next to her, Hatsuka won't stop making noise cheering for the protagonist. As Rina gets nosy, she sees it's Subaru's live stream and strikes up a conversation with the girl. Since she's wearing the same mask as the hero, Rina explains that she's a fan. Then Hatsuka comments that she is too and greets her. But, of course, she also asks for the name of the hooded girl. When there are only 1,300 survivors left, the chat updates the hero saying he has already made 97 kills. Time is almost up, and he has earned 200 credits for each one he defeated. But now an idea comes to the hero's mind, an idea to make noise to try to attract more players. So, using his sword and the power of electricity, he cuts down all the trees around to show his position. And he cuts the ground too, removing the spot where he was standing. Because of this, where the captain is, he hears some noise, and after finishing off those mercenaries, he manages to find the protagonist. But the hero says he was the one who found the captain first. In that case, Schneider says he wants to settle their differences now instead of leaving it for later. And as someone offers 10,000 credits for the hero to defeat the captain, Subaru also gets ready to fight. Now there are 202 people left for the preliminaries to end, so Schneider quickly throws a spear attack to hit the hero. He misses but destroys everything in its path, saying there's still plenty of time for the two to fight. Subaru shows a bit of concern because that strike was only using physical strength, so he knows that if he gets hit, he will die, and that the spear is reaching a very long distance. In a second attack from the captain, the protagonist gets ready and uses the demon's sword to boost all his stats. With that, he manages not only to defend himself, but also to dodge the strike and keep moving forward. But Schneider also gets closer and tries to hit the hero faster. Fortunately, he dodges, but when he was about to try to get behind the captain, he was attacked again and again. When the protagonist counters, he throws the enemy back, making him drag on the ground, then the two gain a bit of distance. Schneider asks why the boy doesn't use thunder, but the hero replies that it's not worth it, especially since he will finish the fight quickly. Schneider finds it very arrogant of Subaru to think he can defeat him like that, and shouts asking if the boy wants to buy time. To prevent the game from ending early, the captain tries to eliminate the hero right away, but the protagonist defends himself, mockingly asking if Schneider was already using all his strength, which only irritates him more. However, the number of survivors reaches 1,000 and the preliminaries end, so Schneider asks the hero to wait a little longer and the two go to the waiting room. In that room, the system explains that there will be a 30-minute break. The protagonist's hands tremble a bit after holding that last blow. Then he realized he underestimated the captain. A few days ago, Hatsuka said that from the moment a streamer got 10,000 live viewers, they could live off it, and now the hero has that amount watching because of Schneider. But talking about the captain also makes him worried since he hasn't managed to clear the dungeon. Back in that forest cabin, already daytime, Shigeru is having an existential crisis due to boredom. But he also complains a lot about someone like Schneider still being stuck on the 3rd floor. The lower the floor, the harder it is to overcome the level difference, even though Subaru has thunder. And Shigeru knows that things can change with raw talent, but from what he sees, he doesn't think it will. In his downtime, the protagonist redeems all the credits and uses 80,000 of them to increase the level of the greed bet. Thus, he raises the skill to level 5 and rank B. But since these things don't show up to the public, they become curious. On the upper side of the stands, Mizuha is alone, staring at the tournament prize. This is because she heard there might be a thief behind the shoes, and she also heard about his identity. Suddenly, a person appears, announcing that the guild reinforcements have arrived. And because Mizuha asks who is leading the team, the person introduces themselves. Then the girl asks what the guy is doing on the 3rd floor, because it's simply Kurokawa who came to help. Mizuha asks if the guild leader is upset with Subaru, and the guy says yes, for him and Schneider. But he also mentions that there is another problem, and that problem is in the stands talking. Behind Rina's mask, she can only think about the frightening amount of mana that Hatsuka has. She wants to know why someone so strong is there, but to not seem strange, she takes off her mask and introduces herself as Tame. Hatsuka explains that she was speaking formally because of the girl's aura, and also recognizes that she is using a face-changing technique. Rina feels so intimidated that she thinks the manager is an assassin sent by Kazuki. But even though Hatsuka doesn't want to get involved, she asks if there is a plan to disrupt the tournament. Because of this, Rina decides to test by saying maybe. Then, with a killer aura, Hatsuka asserts that if the girl does that, she will regret it a lot. Suddenly, the challenge system announces that the 30-minute break is over. Then all participants are teleported to the finals. It is explained that the finals will be a game in a territory capture format. Mizuha explains that when it starts, each player will have a territory, but only 2 people can stay inside one, and they can choose whether to defend, steal, or hold. If a player defeats an opponent, they can take their territory, and the player with the most at the end will keep the shoes. So now that she has explained everything, the girl starts the finals by giving a color to each one. As expected by the hero, no one goes out to attack, because fighting now gives a territory, but waiting can allow them to gain a lot by defeating just one enemy. That's what everyone thinks. However, the hero goes out and already defeats one. After all, his subscribers are paying 300 credits per person. There in the captain's view, he also goes against the strategy of staying still and already secures a territory. The player from the adjacent block panics, but he can't even run from the spear. Thus, in a few seconds, Schneider knocks at least 10 competitors out of the game, and he continues searching for Subaru, until he looks a bit further ahead and finds his yellow territories. In the midst of all that chaos, the two players ignore everything and focus solely on each other. But Subaru turns his back and walks away, prompting Schneider to shout at the boy, calling him a coward. The hero's fans get upset on behalf of the protagonist, but he warns that he will handle it later because he still needs more credits. Our hero continues farming territories and is surprised at how weak the players on the third floor are. Then suddenly, a player named Don Chao enters his territory. This player was that bald subordinate of the captain. Don Chao says he will get in trouble later for kicking the hero's butt there, and the chat informs Subaru that the bald guy is from the blue zone. The bald guy doesn't hesitate and jumps on the protagonist, so the hero shows he will defend himself, but he slips under the attack and cuts the bald guy's spear. Then he easily throws him to the ground, defeating Don Chao, and since it's not real life, he finishes the guy off right there. Subaru eliminates the bald guy so quickly that the chat starts to think he is weak. Then finally, Schneider enters the protagonist's territory, and there's barely time to read the warning properly because the captain rushes towards the hero. The protagonist doesn't let the attack hit him. He sends the spear that was about to hit his head flying away, but the captain strikes again. Schneider shouts for the hero to use thunder quickly, because if he keeps holding back, he will die on the next attack. The protagonist jumps back to gain some space. Then he just holds the sword's hilt, which prompts Schneider to ask if the boy is going to run away again. But Subaru replies that he will give exactly what the captain wants. He begins to summon thunder and uses the Heart of Thunder to increase his power and resistance. Additionally, the skill from the greed bet also helps the hero avoid getting hurt. Schneider can't believe the hero is creating a type of weapon made entirely of lightning. Then the hero asks if it still looks like he wants to run away, and since the captain concedes that he does not, Subaru asks another question, this time questioning if, instead of him, Schneider wants to run away from there. However, thinking that if he can survive this, he will win, the captain says no. Some time ago, the bald guy asked to ask a delicate question. He asked why the boss was so crazy about the Thunder Cave when he already had the strength to leave. But Schneider himself couldn't answer properly and said that people like him usually forget the reasons for their fixations. It could be conviction or obsession, but at least the captain was sure that his life would change because of it. And that reason was enough to never want to give up. Back to his fight with the protagonist, the boy spins the spear to gain speed, and he thinks that Subaru might end up becoming his second obsession until he runs for the final attack. And in respect to the captain's 10 years of effort, Subaru also charges without holding back. Thus, the two get very close, and their strikes clash, using all the strength they have, and the impact creates an explosion in the arena that destroys everything. But instead of the captain's destructive purple aura, the protagonist's yellow one remains. Returning to the audience, the girls stop talking because they feel strange. Rina becomes very suspicious of Hatsuka, but the girl revealed on her own that she was looking for trouble because she was Subaru's manager. Naturally, if there were problems in the tournament, it would affect his stream and her job. Rina acts like a child when she hears she is in front of the hero's manager. Hatsuka then gets very excited and says it was hard to convince her colleagues that she found gold. Rina says she always watches the streams, and the two girls start to understand each other. But suddenly, the explosion from the boys' attacks grabs attention because it's the only thing being broadcast on the big screen. So Hatsuka quickly goes to see what happened and becomes very worried. When the explosion ends, both warriors are still standing, but Schneider has suffered so much that there's a hole from his legs to his chest. Then he falls to his knees, lifeless, and Subaru thinks it would be nice to meet the captain again in the future. With a total of 283 captured territories, Narukami Subaru is the tournament winner, fireworks are launched, and the audience celebrates. Hatsuka also tries to celebrate with her new friend, but she doesn't seem very happy. Rina can't believe that in the end, it's the protagonist who will win the grand prize. Mizuha soon appears to announce again, and tells everyone to listen that Subaru is the winner. Therefore, the girl summons the shoes that are the protagonist's well-deserved prize. Then, Rina stands up in anger from the stands and leaves without saying anything. The seal is broken and the items fall into Subaru's hands, making the boy a bit sad for being away for 20 years. On a normal day, 20 years ago, Toshiya was screaming in anger because he had lost his shoes. A classmate asked why the boy was so irritated and said he was annoying, but he was wearing the little shoes on his huge feet. So, having already told them not to touch them, Toshiya kicked his friend, making everyone laugh, including Subaru. In the chat, some people say the hero should sell because he is a mercenary, but he says he won't, leaving the host confused. Mizuha explains that Subaru could make some good millions from this, but the hero stands by what he said. At that moment, everyone starts trying to make an offer, and someone in the audience even offers 4 million credits. Therefore, the protagonist invokes a very strong lightning power from the sky, and after demonstrating this power, he warns that he won't sell even for 10 million credits. Anyway, after saying everything he had to say, the hero simply turned around and left. At the same time, still in the city, Amon and another player had just watched the broadcast. The boy didn't even know what to say about the protagonist winning. The player named Hanamaki Hiyori says that at this rate, the hero will become the true Subaru, especially since, recently, people were already believing that the new one was better than the old one. Hanamaki explains that they are comparing the two players a lot, but for Amon, someone is definitely influencing this trend from behind. Hanamaki says that even she thought the two were the same, but since Amon disagrees, the girl mentally calls him a fanboy. Anyway, the girl asks if her partner isn't excited about what will happen from now on, but he replies that he has no interest because they both have a job, which is to hunt down the person who will try to steal the shoes. And like a good alpha male, Amon leaves the girl behind alone, even though it couldn't be said they were that alone. Back to the live stream, everyone is drooling over that pair of shoes. Even just like that, Subaru is happy to be in contact with Toshiya again, and changing his thoughts, he thanks the audience for the mission's worth credits. The name of the pair of shoes is Teleria, and it increases speed by 25% and jump by 15%. Then, people discuss, some saying it's good and others saying it's so-so. Anyway, the hero receives a message from Hatsuka warning him about the suspicious person he found and asks the boy to be careful. Rina only realizes now that she might look suspicious, standing there in front of the shoes. She didn't want to reach this point, but she had no other choice. So, when no one was paying attention, she would attack and cut the protagonist's ankles. So the video ends here. If you don't want to miss the next part, activate the notification bell, and see you next time on Tob's channel.